One-eyed mine. I was born and raised in Kháu, Hua-Bin, back in the year 95. Back then, everyone would say that Hua-Bin was a place of mystical waters and dense forests, teeming with spirits and wild beasts. I'm currently studying law, and my life changed after a near-death experience. I remember the strange things that happened around me, so I shared them with my mother, but she didn't believe me. I stopped talking about them and started exploring on my own. My mom told me that I was a difficult child from birth, always crying, always cranky. No one could approach me to hold or feed me, except for her. I was often sick with colds and fevers. By the time I was 5, my temperament hadn't changed. I was still difficult, fussy, and I liked things to be neat and clean. I didn't play with kids my age. I only played alone. My mom recounted how I would hold a piece of silk and dance with it. When she noticed, she took it away and hid it, saying, "What kind of boy dances like this? It's not right." Then she asked me, "Why don't you go out and play with other kids? Why do you stay home and dance?" I told her, "There are these women who visit our house. They teach me how to dance and tell me to practice so I can perform for them later." This startled my mom, but she didn't think much of it. One day, when I came home from school, I was in 1st grade at the time. An old beggar woman came by. She'd been going from house to house asking for food, but no one was willing to help. It was a tough time. People were struggling to have enough to eat themselves. The old woman reached my house, and being kind-hearted, I ran inside and scooped a whole basket of rice for her, saying, "We don't have money, only rice. Here, take this and go home to cook it," I said. My mom came home just as I was giving the rice to the old beggar woman. She didn't have the heart to ask for it back, so she invited the woman in for a glass of water. As they sat and talked, the old woman told us that her home was 10 kilometers away. She explained that she had been fated for hardship and lost everything, which forced her to beg for food. The beggar then told my mom that I was in danger related to water this year, and that she should be careful or the spirits might take me away. She also said I had a special fate and someday I'd have to serve the spirits, so my parents had to raise me well. Otherwise, the spirits would come to claim me. My mom got scared because back then, superstition wasn't as tolerated. Spirit mediums had to operate in secret to avoid getting caught. As time passed, my mom seemed to forget about the old woman's warning. During the rainy season, the water would rise, especially in the ditch behind our house, and sometimes flood our kitchen. One day, it was pouring rain, and the water was rising high. My parents were taking a nap, and I, being a mischievous child, snuck out to play in the water behind the kitchen. While I was playing, I saw a woman from afar, casting a net to catch fish. Curious, I edged toward the wall to get a closer look. The ditch had overflowed, covering the bank, so I couldn't see the edge clearly. I carefully felt my way, one step at a time. I stood on the wall and called out, "Miss, what are you doing?" She looked up but didn't answer. I asked again, and she finally said she was looking for something to pull herself up. I then noticed that she was standing in the middle of the ditch. She asked me, "Can you help pull me up?" Being a helpful child, I asked how I could do that. She replied, "Just give me your hand and I can pull myself up." For some reason, I hesitated, and my mom yelled from behind, "Dee, come inside! What are you doing out there?" Startled, I turned back and said, "I was going to help this lady pull herself up." My mom shouted, "Get inside! There's no one there to pull up." Scared by my mom's shout, I turned to run, but then I felt something cold wrap around my leg and I slipped and fell into the ditch. The current was strong. My mom told me later that it looked like I had lost my footing, but I remember that the woman grabbed my leg and pulled me down. I was tossed around in the rushing water, sinking deeper, as I heard my mom's distant shouts for help. I started to lose consciousness, feeling like I was trapped, unable to wake up. Then I heard distant voices, like I was being held down by something. I saw a bright white light, and as I looked around, I saw other children about my age. Their skin was pale, their flesh looked rotted, and their bellies were swollen. They all stared at me intently. Suddenly, a taller figure appeared, who seemed to be the leader. He asked me, "Why are you here?" I replied, "I don't know. I just woke up and found myself here." He then said, "This place isn't for you. Look toward that light and follow it to get home." Before I left, he warned me to walk straight ahead and never look back, no matter who called my name or tried to talk to me. He said I had to walk fast to get home. He also mentioned that if I ever remembered this moment, I should come back and bring them some money, clothes, and food. I just nodded in agreement. He told me his name was T. If I returned, I should call his name and he would appear. Then he told me to go quickly, saying I shouldn't be late. So I ran straight toward the end of the path where the light was brightest. The light became so intense that I couldn't see anything, but I heard faint voices in my ears. Suddenly, I opened my eyes and saw people around me, crying with relief. The doctor came in to check on me and asked my mother to step into a private room to talk. My mother followed him. Later, I learned that when I fell into the ditch, my mother had called for help, but the current was so strong that no one dared to jump in. Everyone rushed to search for me, but the water was swift and they couldn't find me. My whole family had prepared for the worst. They searched all afternoon using various techniques, but I was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until the old beggar woman I'd given rice to heard about it that she came. By then, they said she'd gone to a spiritual healer for help. Everyone asked her to perform a ritual to help locate my body. She set up a small altar and began chanting, trying to reach out to the spirits. After a while, she said they had to wait for a sign, and wherever lightning struck, that's where I would be found. People questioned how there could be thunder and lightning when the rain had stopped hours ago. About 20 minutes later, the storm started again, with dark gray clouds, howling winds, and powerful lightning. People raised their heads to watch the bright flashes in the sky. Then a thunderclap so loud it seemed to shake the earth echoed through the air, and lightning struck an old tree at the end of the ditch. They called it the Orphan's Ditch, a place known for its dangerous currents and stories of people who had nearly drowned. The strange thing about this ditch was that it had a spring that never dried up, and the water flowed in two separate directions. Everyone rallied the boats to search near the tree where the lightning had struck, because no one dared to swim in the storm. Before they went into the Orphan's Ditch, they bowed their heads and offered a silent prayer, asking permission from the spirits. Once they reached the shore, they searched around the area and eventually found my body. People were shocked to see my face looking so healthy, even though they thought I was dead. My uncle ran over to carry me, and he felt my heart was still beating. He started CPR and rushed me to the hospital. While I was being treated, they asked if I had seen anything, but just then, my mother and the doctor came back. The doctor checked my eyes while shaking his head, and my mother was extremely worried. The doctor said I lost vision in my left eye because I hit my head on a rock while I was submerged. The impact damaged my optic nerve, so I couldn't see with that eye anymore. Now I could only see out of my right eye. But I was confused and asked, "But I can still see with both eyes, doctor." "That's impossible. I've checked and rechecked," he replied. To prove it, I covered my right eye, the one that wasn't damaged, and said, "Look, doctor, I can still see. I can even see a lot of people. There's Uncle A, there's Uncle B, and there's Uncle C." Then I switched and covered my left eye, looking with my right. "Oh, where did they all go? I can't see them from this side," I said. Everyone's expressions suddenly turned pale and they started sweating. The doctor asked, "Did you just mention Uncle B?" "Yes, he's right over there," I replied. Then I realized that Uncle B had died a long time ago. But how could that be? I got scared and tried covering my eyes again, and the same thing happened. Later on, I understood. My left eye was blind, but it could see spirits. From that point on, my life entered a new chapter. After the near-death experience, I didn't tell anyone that my left eye could see ghosts. At that time, I was just a kid, and nobody would believe me anyway. I told the doctor that I could see blurry images, but I wasn't completely blind, just to avoid raising suspicion. Since then, I went back to living my regular life. The only difference was that I had more friends, only I didn't know if they were real people or ghosts. I was just happy that some kids played with me. My mom noticed that I often mumbled to myself and played alone, but she didn't pay much attention. She just thought it was good that I was quiet, allowing her to focus on making a living. One afternoon, I went out with the neighborhood kids to catch stink bugs to roast. Back then, stink bugs were a delicacy because there weren't many snacks like today. We went behind the mountain where there were plenty of lychee trees, so there were a lot of stink bugs. While we were busy catching bugs, my friend spotted a long, rectangular stone with a rounded top. There were some chains and a mirror attached to it. Kids are curious and mischievous, so he invited us to take a closer look to see what it was. When we reached it, I felt a strange, eerie chill. I should probably explain how my left eye worked. To see ghosts with my left eye, I had to cover my right eye and blink my left eye 3 times. I discovered this by accident at the hospital. Otherwise, I could only see with my right eye. As we got closer to the stone, I felt really nervous, hearing a faint whisper, come here," like I was being hypnotized. My friend slowly approached and started pulling on the chains, removing the mirror, revealing a small gap to push the stone lid open. He called us over to help push the lid, and we pushed with all our might until it opened enough for a person to crawl through. He said, "Let me stick my head in to see what's inside. It might be a treasure chest." I thought to myself, treasure chest? More like a load of nonsense. That's my own words. My friend later admitted he didn't actually believe there'd be treasure, but I changed it up to make it more interesting. He stuck his head in and made a few echoing sounds before pulling back out. Then he challenged us, "I dare any of you to stick your head in and see what's inside." He winked at one of the other kids in our group to play along and scare me. He knew I was easily scared. The other kid stuck his head in and said, "There's nothing in there. It's pitch black. Go ahead, D, give it a try." He made some creepy noises to tease me. My inner machismo kicked in, so I said, "Move aside, let me see." I stuck my head in, but immediately felt intense pain, like someone was banging on my skull with a mallet. It hurt so much that I couldn't pull my head back out. I'm scared of the dark, and when I realized I was stuck, I started screaming and crying for the others to pull me out. They freaked out too and stopped messing around, trying to pull me out. But no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't budge me. The only option was to push the stone lid a little further open. So everyone got together and shoved it. In the midst of all the chaos, with tears streaming down my face, I saw these eerie blue, red, purple, and yellow lights. When the lid opened enough, I saw that the bottom of the tomb was filled with white bones. I was terrified and managed to push myself out, and the grip that had been holding me was gone. When I was free, I shouted, "Hey, you guys should check this out. There are a lot of bones and there's a glowing light. Who said there's nothing in there?" My friend stuck his head in again, but said he didn't see anything. He thought I was hallucinating from fear. I wanted to smack him for being so dismissive, but I let it go because I was still shaken up. It was getting dark, so we all decided to go home. On the way back, my friend grabbed the mirror from the stone lid, saying he was going to take it home for his mom to use. As we left, I had this feeling that someone was watching me, my spine tingling, and the hair on my arms and legs standing on end. That night, after everyone went home, I suddenly got a high fever. I didn't know why I was so sick, and I started having delirious dreams, crying and mumbling. My mom noticed and tried to get me to speak clearly. She asked, "What's wrong? Speak up." I only remember saying, "Mom, ask T." He took me bug hunting and then to the tomb. I was so scared. Then I went back into a feverish daze. My mom sensed something was wrong, so she burned some paper to ward off evil spirits and lit an incense stick on our ancestors' altar to pray for protection. When the incense burned out, I suddenly woke up. She picked me up and took me to T's house. He was sitting there doing homework, and my mom tried to ask him about what happened. But he just shrugged and said, "I was just joking with D. There's no ghost or anything." I was half awake, half asleep, but I noticed the mirror he took was placed at the corner of his bed. That's when I fainted again. The next morning, T's mom came running over, panicking. "T's missing," she said. "Last night, he finished his homework and went to bed, but he got up to use the bathroom. When he came back, he looked pale like he'd seen something terrifying. I asked him what was wrong, but he wouldn't say. He just hugged the mirror and bowed to it, mumbling to himself." While she was talking, H's mom, H was the other kid who joined in on the prank, came over, also saying H was missing. My mom tried to calm them down. They probably just went out to play together. Both moms seemed reassured, but I was still feverish. In my fevered state, I saw the shadows of T and H beside me. They wanted me to come with them to go bug hunting again. I was too sick, so I kept shaking my head. The two of them said, "We'll wait for you to get better. We'll be behind the mountain." They also told me to bring the mirror when I come. Then they disappeared. Later that afternoon, when I started to feel a bit better, I heard a lot of noise outside. People were saying that T and H still hadn't come home, so the whole neighborhood started looking for them. Their parents came to ask me if I knew where T and H usually went to play. I just shook my head, but then I remembered what I'd said during my delirium, so I told my mom to take me to the spot behind the mountain. Everyone followed me, but as we approached, dark clouds rolled in and a strong wind started blowing. Everyone felt a chill, and the mountain seemed more foreboding than usual. We searched every corner, but we couldn't find them. As we were searching, the dogs began barking and howling, and a storm was brewing, with the sky getting dark quickly. The dogs wouldn't stop barking, which made everyone think there might be a wild animal nearby, so they huddled together for safety. Where I lived, we called it the leopard field, and the eerie cries of night birds startled everyone. When someone shone a flashlight upwards, we saw something swaying back and forth in the trees. A flashlight beam revealed the bodies of T and H, hanging from chains tied to a coffin lid. Everyone was horrified. I felt weak and could barely stand. Their families were crying and wailing in despair. People climbed the tree to cut them down, and I was so weak I had to lie on my father's back. The fever hit me again, and all I could hear were distant cries before I passed out. When I came to, it was at their funeral. The grief was palpable, with the mournful wails echoing throughout. As the funeral procession continued, the fan, wooden sticks with paper decorations, swayed back and forth, making everyone both sad and afraid, murmuring about how the spirits might be coming back. Talking about spirits, I remembered my special ability. I covered my right eye and looked around with my left eye, scanning the area. The graveyard was full of spirits, hungry ghosts, thirsty ghosts, all gathering because of the funeral. If I hadn't been trained to see ghosts by then, I might have wet myself from fear. I looked at the two fans swaying in the wind and saw ghost children playing around them, climbing on them, and teasing the monk conducting the burial ritual. But I didn't see T and H anywhere. One of the kids jumped onto the monk's head, causing him to stumble and fall, which made me laugh. But as I turned away, a foul stench hit my nose. It was the smell of death, strong and unpleasant. I felt dizzy and walked toward my mom, but before I could take a few steps, I fainted again. When I came to, I heard someone calling my name, Dung Dung. I turned around and saw T and H standing right behind me. Seeing them made me break out in a cold sweat, unable to speak. T said, "Why didn't you come play with us? Where's the mirror?" You were supposed to bring it to the tomb behind the mountain. We're waiting for you there." The words jolted me awake. Everyone was still gathered around me, wondering why I had fainted. The monk asked, "Did you take anything from the place behind the mountain?" That's when I remembered the mirror and said, "T took a mirror." Hearing about the mirror, an old fortune teller in the crowd spoke up. She said that behind that mountain used to be the home of a nobleman who was murdered. They buried his entire family in that tomb, but before doing so, they put a spell on the mirror to keep the nobleman's spirit from escaping and seeking revenge. T, out of curiosity, that broke the seal and took the mirror home, releasing the spell. The fortune teller did some calculations with her fingers and said that this wasn't over. Another person would be taken. Everyone at the funeral was terrified. The fortune teller asked me, "Besides the three of you, was anyone else there?" I told her M was with us. When I said that, everyone panicked and ran off to find M. When we got to her house, she was sitting in a corner, looking completely terrified, not saying a word, just staring straight ahead. The fortune teller told M's mother to start preparing an offering right away. She said the first step was to call M's spirit back before something worse happened. The offering included a chicken, a plate of sticky rice, paper money, and sweets. The fortune teller said that while she was chanting, we should keep calling M's name and clapping to bring her spirit back. Once the ritual was over, M finally came around. She said, "I was playing with an old man and T and H. T told me to climb a tree to pick lychees, where there were a lot of stink bugs. As I climbed up, I heard my mom calling, and I ran back, but then I found myself here." Everyone was relieved to hear her speak. While we were talking, T's mother came over, saying they'd found the mirror. It was an ancient mirror, beautiful but tarnished by the elements. When you looked into it, you couldn't see your reflection clearly, just a blurry, distorted shape. People were so scared that they decided to find a sorcerer to reseal the mirror and contain the spirit of the nobleman. That night, the whole neighborhood kept watch over our house and M's house, worried that something bad might happen. The next morning, our family and M's family went to the nearby village to find the sorcerer. When we got there, we met his grandson, who said the sorcerer had passed away several years ago. When we told him our story, he understood and agreed to help. He set the date for the 15th, when the moon would be at its fullest. 2 days passed, and everyone was anxious. Once everything was ready, the grandson placed the mirror back in its original spot on the coffin lid, which was in a hidden part of the mountain where the moonlight didn't directly reach. The sorcerer glanced at the sky, calculated something, and told us to get a few more mirrors. He personally placed the mirrors in various spots, in a specific pattern that I couldn't understand. I thought he was just placing them randomly. He prepared a bowl of black dog blood and drew strange symbols on the coffin lid, creating 2 circles that looked like magic circles from TV, and told me and M to stand inside them. When everything was set, he asked everyone to leave for a while. He lit 3 incense sticks and placed them in a bowl of rice, mumbling some incantations. After a while, the trees began to sway, but there was no wind. That's when I used my left eye and saw the nobleman with disheveled hair standing on the stone box, holding 2 chains with T and H on the other ends. The sorcerer's grandson shouted, "Why are you capturing these kids? What did they do to deserve this?" The nobleman replied, "They disturbed my rest, so I took them as my servants." He added, "I will take the other 2 as well to complete my set." As soon as he said that, he glared at me and asked, "Can you see me?" I froze in fear. The sorcerer's grandson turned to look at me, as if he understood. He ran toward me, but T and H jumped on his back, pinning him down. To outsiders, it looked like he couldn't move, but I could see T and H holding him down. The nobleman started approaching me slowly, but when the sorcerer's grandson recited an incantation, the blood circle glowed, preventing the nobleman from touching me. At that moment, the moonlight reached its peak at midnight. I noticed that the placement of the mirrors was deliberate. The first mirror reflected the moonlight straight up, which bounced onto the second mirror. The second mirror redirected the light to the third mirror, which formed a zigzag pattern, finally hitting the main mirror on the stone coffin lid. The light shone right into the spot where the stone box was, and along with the charm that the sorcerer's grandson used, it created a force that pulled the spirit of the nobleman into the mirror. As the nobleman was drawn in, I saw T and H getting pulled in too. I shouted, "Sir, T and H are about to get dragged in." The sorcerer's grandson seemed to understand, and he quickly threw a bowl of black dog blood onto the chains, releasing T and H just in time. But unfortunately, this was a moment of celestial alignment, so both of them were immediately taken by the spirits. After that incident, I had more strange encounters, especially during my sophomore year of high school. It was around the middle of 2010. By then, our town had become quite populated, but the surrounding mountains and forests still gave it a desolate feel. Across the street from our house, there was a piece of abandoned land. That spot was the usual hangout for all the neighborhood kids. But one day, a family moved in and started building a house, so the kids had to find a new place to play, often near the cemetery. The new family had a husband and a wife, and the wife was pregnant, almost due to give birth. They seemed wealthy, with a lot of resources. When they finished building the house, they moved in, and unlike other wealthy families, they were quite friendly. That evening, while our family was having dinner, they came over to introduce themselves. They mentioned they might need help, especially since the husband traveled a lot for work, and the wife was expecting their baby soon. He said, "I travel for work, and my wife is almost due. I bought this land because it's quiet and peaceful, a good place for the baby." My mom agreed. "It's a good place with fresh air, great for a baby." The husband then asked, "If my wife goes into labor while I'm away, could you help her?" He was worried about being away when his wife gave birth. While they were chatting, I felt a cold chill and had the sense that someone was eavesdropping on our conversation. Suddenly, we heard a clanging sound. It turned out to be a black stray cat, which was surprising because it was rare to see it. The cat was larger than usual and might have been a wild cat. The local drunks had tried to trap it many times but failed. Rumors said it was attracted to newborn babies, even eating their umbilical cords. I don't know if that's true. These days, people give birth in hospitals, so where would the cat find umbilical cords? The cat ran off, but the pregnant wife turned pale, clearly frightened. My mom offered her some oil to help calm her down, saying it was cold at night and there were wild animals around, so there was nothing to worry about. She told her husband to take her home, lest it affect the baby. A few weeks later, in July, the rainy season started. It rained non-stop, making the roads muddy and the air damp. Normally, people would stay up late, but because of the rain, everyone ate early and went to bed around 7 p.m. The rain was so constant that people joked it was because Coward and the Weaver Girl, legendary lovers, were crying, causing all the rain. They complained about how difficult it was to earn a living in this weather. With everyone stuck indoors, some people decided to gather a group to hunt in the mountains. I really wanted to go, but my dad said, "We're going near the sacred burial site. It's risky and you might cause trouble. You'd better stay home." I begged him to let me go, but he refused, so I had to sneak out. After the group left for 15 minutes, I slipped out, telling my mom I was going to my grandmother's house. She believed me, so she let me go. Grown-ups sure do walk fast. I followed them until I reached the sacred stone site, feeling scared and nervous. But I remembered the sorcerer's grandson's warning that as long as you didn't disturb the place, you'd be fine. So I decided to run fast and avoid getting too close to it. After a while, I heard loud voices. I figured I must have caught up to the group, so I slowed down, thinking, seriously, who goes hunting while talking this loudly? No way they're catching anything like this. I walked for a bit longer, and it was around noon, and nothing had happened to me. I decided to meet up with the group. Hey, what are you doing here? When did you sneak in? I just followed you. Have you eaten anything yet? I shook my head, and my dad had handed me some rice and a few pieces of wild chicken. Dad, did you catch a lot? My dad pointed to the haul of game they had gathered, full of birds, rabbits, and wild chickens. I overheard some people in the group saying, it would be awesome to find a deer or a wildcat. Then everyone started drinking again. Around 1 p.m., they were getting ready to move again. My dad told me to stay back and guard the catch, saying it was too dangerous to go with them. As a kid, being given a task by adults felt great, so I agreed. I sat there, playing with the game, and it was getting close to dusk, but no one had returned. Being in the forest at night was risky. The sound of goats and insects made me shiver, and the occasional shriek from passing owls sent shivers down my spine. I had heard that wild animals were afraid of fire, so I built a campfire, sitting close to it to keep any dangerous creatures away. While I was sitting, I felt a sudden chill behind me. I thought something wasn't right, so I used my left eye to scan the area, but I didn't see anything. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. Despite not seeing any ghosts, the sense of uneasiness remained. I sat there silently. Even the insects had stopped buzzing. The only sound was the creaking of bamboo swaying in the breeze. My mom once said that if bamboo made that noise, it meant ghosts were trying to lure you to sleep. Why did I think about that in this situation? I broke out in a cold sweat, and suddenly I heard a branch snap behind me. I instinctively grabbed a burning stick and stood up, shouting to scare off any threats. Why was it so eerily quiet? In my panic, a hand suddenly clapped me on the shoulder. Oh my gods, it's over! I turned around in terror to find it was Miss H, the rich lady who had recently moved into our neighborhood. Oh, it's you, Miss H. What are you doing here? I asked, trying to catch my breath. Oh, I enjoy hunting too. I followed the group, but I got lost, and when I saw your fire, I ran over, she said, almost out of breath. Geez, lady, you scared the life out of me. If I had fainted, I might have died. I calmed down a bit and said, why don't you wait here for the others to return? We sat and talked for a while, but I noticed something strange about Miss H's belly. Miss H, did you already have your baby? Why didn't anyone know? I asked. Yes, I gave birth 2 days ago. It was raining and everyone was inside, so no one saw, she explained. Just then, I heard people talking nearby. I said, oh, looks like the group is back. Miss H suddenly got anxious and said, I have to go. I forgot to feed my baby. Oh no, take some fire and follow this trail. It leads to your house, I replied. Miss H nodded and hurried off, her silhouette fading into the dense bamboo forest. Just then, the rest of the group finally arrived, but they looked alarmed, not cheerful like they had been at noon. My dad ran over to me, tears streaming down his face, and asked rapidly, Are you okay? Did anything happen to you? My dad asked. No, I'm fine, I replied. He told me that the hunting group had spotted a black cat, so they gathered to try to catch it. Since it was dark and the cat was black, it was difficult to see, and the cat was quick on its feet. They decided to use fire to get a better look and surround it. When the fire was lit, they saw that the cat was as big as a wild panther with bright green eyes. It had something in its mouth, and when they took a closer look, they saw that it was a human leg with a child's head attached to it. My dad panicked, thinking the black cat might have caught me, so the entire group ran back to check on me. When they saw I was safe, everyone breathed a sigh of relief and decided it was time to go home. I was so caught up thinking about the black cat that I forgot to mention that I'd just seen Miss H. I also forgot to tell everyone about the strange cold feeling I had, as if someone was watching me. The wind was still howling, and the insects' cries had an eerie, mournful sound. When we got home with the day's catch, the neighborhood decided to throw a party, like a feast to celebrate unity. Everyone contributed what they had, with some bringing rice and others providing pots, pans, and other cooking utensils. Everyone seemed happy, like it was a village festival. I joined the other kids in the neighborhood to gather supplies. When we passed by Miss H's house, I noticed that same cold, piercing gaze. I went to knock on the door, but no one answered. I figured she was putting her baby to sleep, so I moved on. My friends were getting impatient and went to check, saying, "It's been a while since we've seen Miss H walking around. Maybe she's out of town." While we were talking, the door suddenly creaked open, startling everyone. C said, "Oh, the door's open. Should we go in and see where Miss H is?" M replied, "No, don't. It's all dark inside, and it's a rich person's house. We don't want to get in trouble if something goes missing." That made sense, so I suggested we move on. As we walked away, I heard the sound of a baby crying. I turned around and saw the silhouette of Miss H through the window. The front door slammed shut. I asked my friends, "Did you hear that baby crying?" They replied, "No, we didn't." I thought maybe I was hearing things. We went to the last house on our list, Uncle B's place. His house was near the cemetery, but we weren't afraid because we often played around there. C would sometimes bow at a few graves and then take incense sticks and eat them. But nothing ever happened. Well, not yet, but I'll tell you more about C later. Uncle B was usually a nice man who organized games for us, so all the kids liked him. He didn't have children, and his wife had passed away, so he wasn't always in a cheerful mood. But today, when we knocked, he opened the door with a worried look. He said, "Why are you out so late? There's something bad coming to this neighborhood." Then he slammed the door shut. We didn't understand what he meant, so we headed back. When we got back to the main gathering spot, everyone was setting up for the feast, with kids bringing food, setting up plates, and cleaning vegetables. It was lively and fun. I was sitting near the kitchen area, listening to the women talk. "Why hasn't Miss H been coming to the market lately?" asked Mrs. R. "Now that you mention it, I haven't seen her either. She used to visit my house to ask about childbirth," replied Mrs. S. "And where's her husband? Why doesn't he come back to see his wife and child?" they wondered. Everyone fell silent as the eerie sound echoed through the night. The cat's cry was like a baby wailing, a sound that sent chills down everyone's spine. I recognized it immediately. It was the same sound I'd heard earlier at Miss H's house. Some people shouted, "It's the black cat," while others began to murmur anxiously. The moonlight was bright, casting long shadows, but it didn't provide enough light to see the source of the noise. The tension was palpable as some of the younger men suggested going out to hunt down the cat, but the older folks urged caution. The neighborhood leader spoke up. "Let's not rush into anything. We don't know what we're dealing with. Everyone, stick together and stay in well-lit areas." Despite the uncertainty, some people ventured outside to check if the cat was nearby. The breeze rustled the leaves and the shadows danced eerily. The air was filled with a sense of dread. I stayed close to my friends, not wanting to wander too far from the safety of the group. As the party wound down, people started heading home in small groups. The streets were quieter than usual, the earlier merriment replaced with an unsettling calm. The distant sound of the cat's meow echoed again, causing some people to quicken their pace. My friends and I decided to stick together as we made our way back to our homes. When we reached my house, I noticed that the door to Miss H's place was slightly ajar. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Was the cat inside? Had someone broken in? I pointed it out to my friends, and they agreed we should report it to the neighborhood leader. We quickly went to find him and let him know about the open door. He listened carefully and nodded. "We should check it out, but we need to be careful." He gathered a small group of men and headed toward Miss H's house, while the rest of us stayed back, watching from a safe distance. As the men approached the house, the cat's meow grew louder, more agitated. It sounded like it was coming from inside. The leader signaled for everyone to be quiet as they pushed the door open. The inside of the house was dark, with only a sliver of moonlight filtering through the windows. The men cautiously entered, flashlights in hand, ready to confront whatever was inside. The cat's meow grew louder, almost frantic. Suddenly, a black shape darted out from the shadows, knocking over a chair as it fled through the back door. The men gave chase, but it was too quick, disappearing into the night. The neighborhood leader returned to us, his face pale but relieved. "It's gone," he said. "Let's not take any chances tonight. Everyone, get home safely, and we'll deal with this tomorrow." With that, we all headed to our respective homes, hearts still racing from the encounter. As I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was something about Miss H's house, about the black cat, that seemed connected. The uneasy feeling lingered, and I knew that the story wasn't over yet. Everyone looked in the direction the woman was pointing. Sure enough, the cat was standing on the rooftop, glaring at everyone. Its eyes had a ghostly glow, and its expression seemed full of resentment. It tilted its head back and let out a few haunting meows before disappearing. Everyone was pale with fear and started chattering nervously. The older women decided to pack up and plan to meet the next day to discuss what to do. Normally, this cat was so sly that it would never show itself like this. After cleaning up, everyone went home. I went back with my mom. The moon was shining brightly, casting an eerie, ghostly glow over everything. It was only 7 a.m., but there was already a commotion. The older women, those who were superstitious, had gathered to gossip about what happened the night before. It was almost like a market, with everyone talking at once. I decided to join the conversation, but my mom flicked my forehead, telling me to go away because this was for adults. I knew better, so I ran to M's house to play. As we were playing, we heard police sirens and saw ambulances rushing down the street. M and I ran outside to see what was happening, and we found a bunch of people running toward the commotion. I asked one of them, "What's going on?" He replied, "Didn't you hear? They found Uncle B dead at the cemetery." M and I froze, feeling both shocked and scared. How could he be dead? We just saw him the other day. Just as we were processing this, our friends came to drag us along to see what was going on. The place was crowded with people, and the neighborhood leader was there as a witness. The scene was cordoned off, so we couldn't get too close, but C knew a spot where we could get a good view of Uncle B's body. We sneaked behind the cemetery and pushed through some bushes to get a better look. Uncle B's face was frozen in a look of fear and pain, as if he'd encountered something horrifying. What was particularly disturbing was that his eyes were missing and his mouth was wide open. There were scratch marks on his neck. "Hey, what are you kids doing? Get over here!" The police called us over. The neighborhood leader mentioned that the kids had seen Uncle B the night before, but when he went over, Uncle B was missing. "Did you notice anything unusual when you saw Uncle B yesterday?" he asked. M replied, "No, we saw him, but he seemed tired and scolded us, then slammed the door shut." After a few more questions, the police let us go. Some of the older women there were talking about the cause of death, suggesting it happened around 11 p.m. One of them wondered if it could have been related to the black cat. Another woman said, "That's unlikely. Even though the black cat is as big as a panther, it couldn't attack a grown man. It might harm a child, but not a full-grown adult." Another woman said, "Yeah, if a panther attacks, it goes for the intestines first. Here, it's just the eyes that are missing." The neighborhood leader then told everyone to stop gossiping and focus on helping with the funeral arrangements. He also asked us kids to either help or go back home. Since we couldn't do much, we headed back to my house. As soon as we got there, my friends wanted to eat, so we started raiding the fridge and cooking food, making it feel more lively. It was already 11 a.m. by then. My mom came rushing in, telling us to watch the house because she and Mrs. S were going to the upper town to find a priest. She left in a hurry, and Mrs. S came by to pick her up. As we were eating, C mentioned, "Did you notice anything strange yesterday?" I felt like someone was watching us ever since we left Mr. H's house. M replied, "You're starting to sound like D." "Hey D, tell them about your eye. They're all friends. You don't need to keep it a secret." So I sat down and told them about my ability. While I was talking, N interrupted, "So did you see anything yesterday?" No, I didn't." "Yeah, I was wondering about that. Remember what happened to H and T? Since then, I knew D could see ghosts, but lately he hasn't seen much. Yesterday, I asked him to check, and he saw nothing." "Stop talking about those two. It's creeping me out. I'm going to wet my pants if you keep it up," M said. "Oh, guys, I noticed something when Uncle B opened the door. There was something inside his house," N added. "Yeah, now that you mention it, there were strange noises too. Let's just eat. I need to finish cleaning up," someone else said. By the time we finished eating and cleaned up, it was around noon. C invited everyone to go play video games, but I was tired and stayed home to sleep. I had just dozed off when I experienced sleep paralysis. I was aware of everything but couldn't move. I'd heard that if you can't wake up from sleep paralysis, it means you're about to be taken, so I was scared. I saw my mom and Mrs. S walking back, and behind them was Uncle B. He didn't enter the house, he just stood outside. Then Miss H appeared. I hadn't seen her since we met in the forest. She was holding a child by the hand. But wait, how was the child walking? He was just born, wasn't he? When I looked closely, I saw that the child was missing half of his head and a leg, and I heard him growling. Suddenly, he lunged at my mom, and I screamed in terror. That's when I woke up. I was drenched in sweat, realizing it had been a dream mixed with sleep paralysis. When I woke up, it was already 4 p.m. I had only slept for a little while, but I felt exhausted and lethargic. I went outside and noticed that even though it was 4 p.m., it was dark like nighttime. I opened the door and saw Uncle B standing in front of me, his eyes bulging out. The child from my dream was gnawing on Uncle B's arm. He looked up at me with a sinister grin, his face bright red, his eyes glowing green. I was too scared to move. I screamed for help, but couldn't get my legs to work. Then I woke up again, this time for real. My mom was sitting beside me, and I knew I was finally awake. "What's wrong?" "You were mumbling and screaming in your sleep," she said. I told her about the dream, and she said, "That's what happens when you watch too many scary things. It messes with your mind." She told me to cook dinner while she went to Uncle B's house to help with the funeral arrangements. They were planning to bury him the next day. By 7 p.m., I'd finished cooking, and my friends invited me to go to the wake. I was still shaken from my dream, but I didn't want to stay home alone, so I went with them. When we got there, the atmosphere was chilly and somber. C asked me to check if Uncle B's spirit was there. I tried, but I didn't see anything unusual, just a few hungry and thirsty ghosts. C told his mom, who was with a group of women from the neighborhood. He said innocently, "Mom, why don't we see Uncle B's spirit?" She replied, "He's not coming back. We invited a priest, and he said Uncle B died at an inauspicious time, so his soul is being held. Luckily, he didn't have any close family, so we don't have to worry about more bad luck." C listened for a bit, then came back and invited us to gather some firewood to roast sweet potatoes. "Where are we going to find firewood at this hour?" I asked. "There's plenty near the cemetery," C replied. "Or maybe L's legs will get yanked by ghosts if he goes out there." Ha ha! Even though we joked, we still followed him since he was our leader. As we walked past the spot where Uncle B died, I said, "Hey, let's not go there, I'm scared." "You're more chicken than M and N," someone retorted. I summoned all my courage to go with them. We were busy collecting some branches when C suddenly screamed, "Hey, where's N?" We all looked around, but she was gone. M got so scared that she ran back to call the adults for help. Everyone came out to search, but N was nowhere to be found. Just then, the priest who had been invited to the wake showed up and said, "She might be hiding due to spirits. Someone fetch me some willow branches and start striking everything with them." C remembered that I could see ghosts, so he shouted, "D, use your eye." I quickly used my left eye to scan the area, but I didn't see anything. Even though it was July and should have been hot, I felt a chill in the air. It was the same feeling I'd had before when something wasn't right. The priest told everyone, "Only those with strong spirits should stay. If you feel weak, leave now. I can sense strong negative energy approaching." People started drinking ginger-infused liquor to ward off evil. My mom saw me with one eye closed and one open, so she asked, "What's wrong with your eye? You should go home. We have enough people here to search." So I decided to leave with my friends. As we passed by the spot where Uncle B died, C nudged me, signaling me to use my left eye. When I did, I saw a cluster of ghosts. It was as if they had gathered because of the incense burned earlier in the day. I glanced up and saw someone sitting in the tree. It was Uncle B, and he was holding N's mouth shut. I screamed in fear, which made everyone rush over. "It's N! Get her down from there!" someone shouted. When they brought her down, her eyes were open but lifeless, as if she wasn't aware of what was happening. The adults decided to take her to the hospital. The priest assured us, "It's okay, just a simple ritual to bring her back, and she'll be fine." Then he added, "We should have checked this spot first. People who have just died tend to stay near the place of their death for 3 days before they move on." After taking N to the hospital, it was almost midnight. People were exhausted, so they split into groups. Some went home while others stayed to watch over the body for the funeral the next day. After the arrangements were made, a cold wind swept through, sending chills down everyone's spines. The candles blew out, and even the LED lights flickered weakly. Barn owls flew in, their cries piercing the night. It was eerie enough to frighten even the bravest men. A moment later, a thick fog rolled in, and people were puzzled. Since when did July have fog? The dogs from the neighborhood began to howl, pointing toward the cemetery. Everyone turned to look, and we kids huddled by the door, too scared to move. Through the dense fog, a shadowy figure of a woman appeared. Mrs. V gasped, "Miss H, what are you doing here?" The crowd was buzzing with whispers, and from behind Miss H, a pair of glowing green eyes appeared. Everyone thought it must be the black cat. The dogs howled even louder, and C nudged me, signaling me to use my eye again. I looked, but this time I saw Uncle B and a group of ghosts. I didn't see Miss H. Just to clarify, when I cover my right eye and use my left, I only see ghosts, not living people. I said, "I only see Uncle B. I don't see Miss H." Everyone started murmuring, and a few brave souls moved forward to check if it was really Miss H. As they got closer, she was gone. There was no sign of the black cat either, but the dogs kept barking. Then the sound of a cat's shrill meow echoed, and as people turned toward the main road, they saw Miss H's silhouette there. Realizing something was wrong, everyone rushed toward her, but by the time they reached her house, she was gone. Instead, they saw the black cat standing on the roof, its eyes sharp and searching, as if it was looking for someone. Then it quickly darted away. People decided to call for Miss H, but the village chief stopped them. "We'll call the police tomorrow. We shouldn't cause trouble in the middle of the night." When everyone returned to the wake, a horrifying scene unfolded before them. The coffin was open, everything was overturned, and the priest was lying unconscious by the door. A few people ran over to help the priest, trying to revive him by pressing pressure points on his nose. It seemed like everyone was more focused on him than on the coffin itself. It took a while, but the priest finally came to, although he still looked shaken and pale. He mumbled incoherently, "The ghost! The ghost!" and then fainted again. Mrs. V suddenly screamed, "Oh my God, everyone! Where's Uncle B's body?" Everyone panicked and ran over to the coffin, but indeed, Uncle B's body was missing. Chaos erupted as people fled outside, some scared, others chattering nervously. The village chief quickly took control, saying, "Nobody wanted this to happen." But it did. "Let's all go home, lock our doors, and discuss this tomorrow morning." The crowd agreed, and most people left. A few stayed behind to escort the priest home. I was so tired that I just wanted to go home and sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me as I walked down the street. The next morning, the village chief woke up early to assign tasks. He told some people to report the missing body to the police, while others were to check on Miss H's house, as she hadn't been seen for days. A group of young men went to clean up Uncle B's house. I went with my friends to play cards, but we heard the police had arrived to investigate, searching for Uncle B's body without any luck. Meanwhile, Mrs. S's group went to Miss H's house and kept calling, but no one answered. We ran over to see what was happening. I mentioned, "The door isn't locked. The night of the party, I came to borrow some dishes, but Miss H wasn't home. The door just opened by itself." Since the door wasn't locked, they carefully opened it, and immediately a foul odor hit them. Everyone felt nauseous from the stench. Inside the house, it was pitch black. Mrs. V was fumbling around, trying to find the light switch, when she touched something that made her jump and scream. People gathered, and then Mrs. S managed to turn on the lights. When everyone looked where the scream came from, they were all shocked. Everyone was stunned, too scared to move or even scream. It was a horrific sight. A few young men from the neighborhood rushed over to help, but when they saw what was going on, they ran to call the police. They found Uncle B's body sitting against a large mirror in the living room, with the furniture in disarray and broken. The police officers who came to the scene noticed blood stains leading from the staircase to Miss H's bedroom, but they couldn't find her. The police called Miss H's husband, but he said he was on a business trip in Japan and wouldn't be back for another 2 months. They investigated further and learned that Miss Doden H was from Ninbin, was unmarried, and had no parents. This meant she couldn't have gone back to her family home. There were a lot of questions, but no answers. The police continued their investigation until noon, then advised the villagers to bury Uncle B without a traditional wake. They would investigate further, but there was no need to keep the body any longer. In the afternoon, they buried Uncle B, and by 3 p.m., my friends and I decided to go to the river for a swim. As we were walking, they talked about the case, wondering if Miss H had been kidnapped or murdered. I told them, when everyone went hunting, I met Miss H in the forest. She said she was hunting too, but then she left before I did. Oh, and she mentioned having given birth. Really? Maybe she went to the city, someone suggested. After swimming, I still felt like someone was watching me. To be sure, I used my left eye to check, but I didn't see anything. This made me feel very uneasy, That evening, after dinner, some of the neighborhood women came over to chat. They talked about Miss H, and my mom shared that the last time she saw her, she was at the market. My mom also mentioned that on the night when there was noise at Miss H's house, she saw visitors there. The women continued to gossip until about 11 p.m. when they finally left. I went to bed, but had trouble falling asleep. The wind coming in through the window was cold, which was unusual for July. I tried to sleep, but then the window slammed shut, startling me awake. I wished I could faint at that moment. There was a pale, bloodied figure standing by the window. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but nothing was there. I even used my left eye to check for ghosts, but still nothing. I thought I was imagining things, so I reached over to close the window. But after a while, I felt the chill again, like someone was watching me. As I lay there, my mind wandered to the eyes of the black cat. I couldn't sleep, so I decided to open my eyes, looking toward the foot of the bed. My body tensed up as I saw a shadowy figure. It was Miss H. Why was she here? Was she a ghost or still alive? So many questions raced through my mind, but I was too scared to scream or even move. Suddenly, the dog started barking, growling toward my room, then howling in distress. I was startled by a loud noise outside the door, and my dad woke up and turned on the lights. By then, I didn't see Miss H anymore. The dogs from other houses began howling too. It must have been around 3 a.m., and other families came out to check, thinking there might be a burglar. But the streets were empty. No thieves, no stray cats, nothing. It was clear that something was wrong. People gathered again, listening to the dogs howl before they went silent. The eerie sound of a black cat meowing, like a baby crying, echoed in the night. This time, everyone saw it standing in front of Miss H's house. All the men grabbed flashlights and ran toward Miss H's house, and I followed because I was too scared to be alone. We chased the cat into her backyard. There, the cat fluffed its fur and refused to leave. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what it would do, hoping to catch it. The cat moved toward a tree and started clawing at the base, growling and yowling, as if trying to indicate something. After scratching for a while, it suddenly jumped away, disappearing into the night. The gusting wind picked up, and it seemed like a storm was brewing, with flashes of lightning lighting up the sky. The men were about to leave when Mrs. S screamed and collapsed, as if she'd been struck by a sudden chill. Everyone turned back and saw her pointing at the spot where the cat had been scratching. When they shone their flashlights there, they saw a human hand sticking out from the ground. It was clear what was hidden beneath the soil. Everyone froze, unable to believe what they were seeing. Eventually, people who were too scared ran off to call the police and find shovels, while others stayed to hold a tarp over the area to protect it from the rain. We kids stood at a distance, watching. It took about 30 minutes to dig it up, and it was indeed Miss H's body. The stench was unbearable, making everyone gag. The cool rain and chill had slowed the decomposition process, but the odor was still overwhelming. They carried her body into the house, and the police arrived to secure the area and search the premises. The initial assumption was that this was a murder resulting from a conflict, as all the valuable items in the house were untouched. An autopsy revealed that Miss H had been dead for about a week, which matched the timeline from when my mom saw her at the market to the night when there were visitors at her house to when we found the body. But then, who did I see in the forest during the hunting trip? 2 days after she supposedly died. Why would a dead person go into the forest with us? And why couldn't I see her ghost with my left eye? I had heard that when people first die, they don't realize they're dead, and their spirit remains near the place of their death. It usually takes 3 days for them to realize they're dead and then go to familiar places. So how could I see her in the forest just 2 days after she died? So many questions swirled in my head, but the most puzzling one was, why did she only appear when I was in a daze or half asleep, but I couldn't see her otherwise? Just as I was lost in thought, someone broke my train of thought by asking the police officer, "What about her child? Did you find the baby?" The officer replied, "Was she pregnant? That explains a lot." At the scene, we found 2 different blood samples, one from the victim and one from someone related by blood. We were wondering if Miss H had anyone else in the house with her. Now we know she had a child. But she wasn't due to give birth yet, Mrs. S pointed out. The officer explained, "When we examined her, we found that her belly had been cut open. It seems the killer murdered Miss H and then cut her open to take the baby out." Everyone was horrified by this revelation. Who could do something so cruel? But everything was still under investigation. The police said they would take Miss H's body for further examination, and if no one claimed it in 3 to 4 days, the neighborhood could arrange a simple burial. People seemed too exhausted and overwhelmed to protest. They just wanted to go home and rest, knowing they'd need their energy for the days ahead. I was sound asleep when C burst into my room, shouting, "Wake up! Something's wrong with N. Come quick!" I jumped out of bed, quickly brushed my teeth, and ran to N's house. As soon as I entered, I heard the soft sounds of crying. I knew something was wrong. I found N's mother sitting in a corner, sobbing quietly. Seeing her like that made me tear up too. When T and H died, I was too young to understand, but now, losing another friend was hard. I was helping C, M, and a few others clean up the house and prepare for the wake. Everyone seemed down. After a while, N's mother came out, and people started asking what had happened. She explained, "I don't know. On the night B died, N asked if she could go out, but I didn't let her. She begged me, so I finally agreed. But later that night, I got a call from her father saying that N was in the hospital. They were giving her an IV, and people were saying she had lost her spirit, so I was planning to ask the priest from B's house to help. She seemed better when I took her home, but she was tired. During the night, she became lethargic, and I told her to rest. This morning, I went to wake her, but she had already passed away." She broke down crying. While she was talking, we heard more sobbing. It was Mrs. Y, who was rolling on the ground, wailing, "Why did you have to go so suddenly, my grandchild? B must have taken you. Your father and mother didn't do the proper rituals, and now you're gone. You should have lived as long as I did. Who's going to light incense now?" Everyone rushed to light incense, realizing that Mrs. Y was N's grandmother. She had come to mourn after hearing the news. After lighting the incense, the spirit seemed to leave Mrs. Y, and she calmed down. Shortly after, some of the younger men came back with news. The priest who had conducted the ritual for B had also fallen ill. They said that he had been muttering in his sleep, repeating, "Please don't take me." The family had taken him to the hospital for a checkup. Then C stood up and said, "Hey, D can see N." I felt like I was struck by lightning. I thought, "I'm never telling you anything again." Everyone gathered around me, asking if I could see her, but I shook my head vigorously. But C wouldn't leave it alone and started telling everyone about my ability and what I had seen in the past few days. N's mother came over and said, "Please, can you help me? Can you see if N is here? Does she have any last wishes? She died so suddenly." I couldn't refuse, so I used my left eye and saw N sitting on the bed. I pointed to where she was and asked her what she wanted. She couldn't speak, but I told her to gesture. After a while, I explained to everyone what was happening. When someone dies, their spirit and soul are divided. Women have 3 spirits and 9 souls. When they die, the 3 spirits leave first, but they stay near the body, waiting for the souls to join them. If they can't reunite, the spirits will disperse and vanish. That's why you need to call the spirits and souls back. But in N's case, B was keeping her souls where he died, preventing them from reuniting. That's why she died. To help her, we need a skilled priest to go to where B died and perform a ritual to release her souls. Everyone was shocked, and they wondered how they could find a priest who could do such a ritual. "I know a priest who helped bring back M's spirit," said M's mom. "She's also a friend of D's mom. I know where she lives. I can go with you to invite her," my mom said. "Thank you, we really need your help," said N's mother. N's mother said, "It was almost noon, and people were preparing for the funeral. My mom and M's mom had gone to get the priest, which might take until 12 or 1 p.m. People visiting the wake were either crying or gossiping about what had happened. Everyone felt sorry for N's family. Around 2 p.m., M's mom, my mom, and the fortune teller, the same woman who had once found my body and helped call back M's spirit, returned. The fortune teller was simply dressed in a brown robe, carrying a bell, a wooden block, and some ritual books. As soon as she arrived, she looked at her fingertips and said, "B died at 11 p.m. during the spirit's peak time, so he couldn't return home and is still wandering around. To call back N's soul, we need to set up a ritual before 11 p.m. when the spirits return. We'll need an article of clothing from B's family to bring his soul back. Otherwise, the wandering spirits could keep it, which would be bad. We also need a feng shui stone and a roll of red yarn. Take these to the nearest temple and ask the monks to bless them." Then she instructed the young men to carve 17 wooden stakes with pointed tips, each the size of a small pipe. Others were asked to pile dirt into a square, 3 meters from where B died. Once the tasks were assigned, everyone got to work, while the women prepared meals. The fortune teller then turned to me and said, "This is the boy from before, isn't it? He's grown so much, but it's a pity." She trailed off with a long sigh. My mom asked her what she meant, but she only replied, "Everything is predetermined. Whatever happens will happen. You can't escape fate." She didn't say more and stepped outside for some fresh air. As time passed, everything was ready by 10 p.m. The fortune teller set 15 stakes in a rectangular formation. 1 stake was placed in B's grave and 1 at the tree where B died. She connected them with a red string in some complex pattern, leading back to the grave. She asked someone to place a charm on the grave stake and set the feng shui stone on top of it. "Make sure it's not upside down. If it is, everything will go wrong," she warned. She attached bells to the string and placed additional charms at the base of the stakes. Once the setup was complete, she sat down in her brown robe to wait. As she waited, she explained her ritual setup. It involved a rare charm from ancient texts called the Dual Forces charm, 1 level below the 8 trigrams charm. The yang element was represented by the wooden stakes, while the yin element was the red string. Together, they created a strong charm to prevent B from escaping and help capture him without attracting other spirits. At midnight, the ritual began. The wind started to pick up. C asked me to use my left eye to see if anything was happening. I saw the fortune teller tapping a bell, then striking the stake in the center 3 times. She began chanting while ringing the bell, but despite the wind, the bells didn't move. I watched as B appeared, but he seemed caught off guard. As he tried to escape, the charm on the stake held him in place, causing the bells to ring. The fortune teller sat down, banging the wooden block and controlling the ritual setup. I saw B being entangled by the red string, and each time she struck the stake, the string pulled him closer, ringing the bells. When he reached the center, he began to scream and wail, his face contorted in pain as if he was losing all his strength. The wind was getting stronger. Those who were more sensitive to spirits started getting headaches, but they didn't realize it was because of B's presence. After B was weakened, the fortune teller turned to everyone and told them to call out B's name from where the stone was placed. As the man in charge of the stone began to call out, I saw B being drawn toward it by a powerful force. Once the bells in the ritual setup stopped ringing, the fortune teller knew that B's spirit had been drawn to the stone. She began chanting while hitting a wooden block, repeating phrases that I could barely make out, something like, Dongju crushes, Jiaoqi perishes. After a while, she shouted, the pillar splits the grave. Then she told the family that the ritual was complete, and now they could call back N's spirit. The family started the ritual by holding an item of clothing and waving it toward the tree where B died, while chanting a phrase. Afterward, they brought the clothing back to the house, signaling that the spirits could return home. The family that had performed the ritual then left. The fortune teller instructed them to bring the stone to a temple so B could hear the prayers. Once the stone broke, it meant that B's spirit had found peace and moved on. With everything done, people were preparing to leave when a thick fog began to roll in and the dogs started howling again. Everyone huddled together as the eerie sound of the black cat echoed in the distance, sounding like a child crying. They tried to find where it was coming from and heard rustling noises. Turning around, they saw the black cat slowly stepping out, its bright green eyes glaring. The fog grew thicker and the wind picked up, bringing a chilling cold. The fortune teller sensed something was wrong and sat down to perform the ritual again. As soon as she struck the bell near the cat, the red string snapped, breaking the setup. Blood started flowing from her nose and she fainted. The crowd rushed to help the fortune teller as the cat let out a haunting cry. People saw a shadowy figure in the distance, moving slowly and erratically. Everyone stood frozen, watching as the figure became clearer. I saw its eyes turn toward me. It was the same menacing gaze I had seen before. Then, a high-pitched laugh filled the air, sending chills down everyone's spine. The figure disappeared, and the cat slowly slipped away. The people carried the unconscious fortune teller to the hospital, and the crowd dispersed, heading back to their homes. I was too scared to stay alone, so I asked my parents if I could stay at C's house. On the way, he said, "Hey, maybe we should stop by N's house to see if her spirit has returned." I thought to myself, why do you think ghosts are like friends you can visit anytime? Despite my thoughts, my legs kept moving toward N's house. When we got there, everyone seemed to have settled down, except for a few young men playing cards. I went to check if N's spirit had returned, and I saw her waving at us before disappearing, as if saying goodbye. I felt sad, thinking how she was just a young girl who should have had a whole life ahead of her. If we hadn't been playing around, maybe none of this would have happened. Tears filled my eyes as I thought about it. C sat in silence, saying nothing. After a while, C said it was late and suggested we head back to his house to sleep. We slept through the night without any incidents. It felt peaceful, which was a relief after all the chaos. But the next morning, M came over and suggested we visit the fortune teller at the hospital to thank her for helping N's spirit. When we got there, we saw many people gathered, including the village chief and some of the older women, making us wonder if something else had happened. We ran inside, worried that the fortune teller might have died. Luckily, she was fine, just a bit weak. We found a corner to listen to what was going on. The fortune teller said our neighborhood had attracted a demon. She asked if anyone else had died recently, so people began telling her about Miss H's story. She checked her notes and explained, Miss H died at the hour of the dog, which means she died with many unresolved grievances. She was also pregnant, which increased her anger, turning her into a hungry ghost, or ngạ quỷ in Vietnamese. The hungry ghost is one of the most dangerous types of spirits, relentless, vengeful, and capable of causing great harm. I don't know how to explain this, but it's like if someone has wronged a spirit, it will go on a killing spree, attacking anyone connected to the victim. The only way to stop it is to find a powerful priest who can neutralize it. The people in the neighborhood asked the fortune teller for help, but she refused, saying that her ritual setup was already the strongest. However, even that was broken last night, which meant she couldn't match the power of the demon haunting the town. With everyone worried, the fortune teller suggested finding her mentor. She gave them the address and told them to seek him out. After she gave them the address, everyone left. C said, "Hey, let's go to Miss H's house tonight. I managed to grab some of the charms from the wooden stakes for protection, so I'll give each of you one for safety." "Wow, you're pretty brave, C," Kay commented. "But really, this might be a good idea. We need all the protection we can get." "I don't think I'm going anywhere," I said. "Don't you remember what happened to N? It was your bright idea that got her into trouble." As soon as I said that, C got angry and shouted at me, but everyone calmed him down. I figured he felt guilty but didn't want to admit it. He's bold and likes to show off, so I didn't say anything more. I don't know how he convinced us, but we all agreed to meet at 7 p.m., planning to leave by 9 p.m. He said ghosts only come out at midnight, and if something went wrong, we could just scream, and someone would come to the rescue since Miss H's house was near mine. The plan was to meet at 7 p.m., but C showed up at 8 p.m., saying he had to shower and put on cologne because ghosts hate good smells. I wonder who told him that? He pulled out a bundle of charms from his pocket and handed them out to everyone. "What kind of charms are these? They look crumpled. Do they even work?" M asked. "I don't know. We'll find out," C replied. We were ready to enter Miss H's house. The door creaked open, making everyone jump. Some of the girls clung to each other. There were 7 of us, just so you know. "Hey, should I turn on the lights?" V whispered. "Don't be stupid. Do you want everyone to know we're here?" C replied. "Use your flashlights and spread out to look for clues." It seemed like C was in charge. Everyone listened to him. We searched the entire first floor, but everything was in disarray. After a while, we moved to the second floor. There were 3 rooms. One led to a balcony, one was a bedroom, and the other was a bathroom. We searched the balcony, but found nothing. Of course, the police had already searched the place. They wouldn't leave anything for us to find. While we were searching, we heard the front door slam shut, startling everyone. "Who forgot to lock the door?" C asked. "It was M," I replied. When I mentioned M, everyone froze. Where was she? She wasn't making any noise, and everyone's hearts started racing. "Okay, we need to find M quickly, and don't split up," C ordered. The sound of a door creaking filled the air, making everyone jump. C dropped his flashlight. "Who opened that door? Where did that sound come from?" he asked. A flash of light appeared from somewhere, and we heard the sound of a toilet flushing. "Why are you all huddling together?" M said, "What were you doing?" "I had to pee. Couldn't hold it," I replied, rolling my eyes. "Oh, I found another room. Let's check it out," M said. We all went in and found a bedroom, but there was nothing unusual. Then we heard a strange noise, a sort of talk, talk, talk. "What's that noise?" someone asked. We all shone our flashlights at the ceiling and realized that the water pipes had burst, causing a leak. Everyone was already on edge, and now some of us were ready to wet our pants. C felt exhausted and sat down at the dressing table, but the chair rocked. He bent down and found a book hidden under the chair, carefully taped. C pulled out the book and started reading. Everyone gathered around to see. It was a diary, but it abruptly ended, suggesting it was from the day Miss H died. Just as we closed the diary, the sound of a child crying echoed through the house, startling everyone. The familiar coldness returned. "I think something's going on. Let's get out of here," C said. We all followed his lead, but just as we stepped out of the bedroom, the bathroom door slammed shut and the crying stopped. We then heard someone whispering. Everyone was too scared to move, so we headed quickly toward the living room. To get there, we had to pass through a room that led to the balcony. As we entered, our flashlights briefly illuminated something sitting on the balcony. It turned its head, and we realized it was the black cat. C shouted, "D, use your special ability." "I've been using it, and all I see is the black cat," I replied. How were we supposed to get downstairs when the cat was blocking the way? It started growling, and we backed up, but someone tripped, and 4 of the flashlights broke, leaving us with only 3. As if things couldn't get worse, a high-pitched laugh rang out, sending chills through everyone. The laugh came from somewhere in the house, and then I saw something darting back and forth, moving swiftly. I shone my flashlight around the room and noticed a large mirror on the wall. When I pointed the light at it, I had a sense that someone was standing there, but when I looked again, there was nothing. When I aimed the light elsewhere, it reflected off the mirror, revealing Miss H standing behind me. Everyone froze for 5 seconds. Then a voice spoke. "Ha ha, ha ha, what are you doing here? My child is hungry," followed by another high-pitched laugh. When we turned to look at the staircase, the cat was gone, so we decided to make a run for it. But something seemed to hold us back, keeping us from moving. C whispered, "Use your charms." As soon as we held out the charms, Miss H disappeared, but she reappeared just as quickly. The dogs outside began barking, and the cat's meowing grew louder, as if signaling something. V panicked, unsure of what to do. We were all paralyzed with fear, and the girls started crying. Suddenly, Miss H slid across the room and stood near the mirror. C, seeing this, threw a flashlight at the mirror, shattering it completely. Glass shards flew everywhere, hitting me. But Miss H reappeared again, sitting at a reading desk, crying. "Oh, my child, I invited some friends over to play with you today," she said before breaking into maniacal laughter. "It's all because B was greedy for that fat lady's money that we had to be separated." Hearing this, I started piecing together what might have happened. Miss H approached me saying, "And you, your family will be next. You have the sight, huh?" She laughed, sending shivers down my spine. M was so scared that she pulled out her charm, but Miss H just laughed mockingly. "Those charms have lost their power. You'll be the first to die," she taunted. M got so scared that she bolted, but she stumbled over something and fell flat on her face. Seeing this, I rushed to help, but she fell onto me, and my hand got cut by shards of glass. Miss H was still approaching us. In a panic, I flung my arm, causing a few drops of blood to splash onto Miss H. Suddenly, Miss H let out a blood-curdling scream and vanished. The lights came on, and everyone rushed in to find us all unconscious, except for M and me. No wonder nobody cried for help or made any noise. They said, "We heard the cat meowing loudly and the dogs howling, so we knew something was wrong and barged in." The scene was terrifying. blood everywhere, and my hand was cut quite deeply by a shard of glass. I felt reassured knowing I was safe, and then I blacked out. The next morning, when I woke up, I was back at home, and my friends were helping my mom cook. I think it was almost noon. When my mom saw me awake, she came in to check on me, and then a few neighbors came over to visit. Everyone was curious about why Miss H vanished. I told them I didn't know. I only remembered that when I swung my arm to defend myself, Miss H screamed and disappeared, and that's when everyone rushed in. Everyone agreed that something was off. They mentioned turning in the diary to the police for investigation. If they could find her estranged husband and his new wife, they might uncover the truth. But why did B end up dead? C said, I heard Miss H say B was greedy, but that was it. That gave everyone a bit more context. Then they asked, what about the black cat? Why does it always appear when Miss H is around? From what we've seen so far, I think the cat ate Miss H's baby, and it shows up out of habit, looking for more to eat, I said. Or it could be trying to point something out or send a signal. I don't think this cat is ordinary. Heh. This led to more speculation, with everyone waiting for the priest to come back, which was expected by the afternoon. After lunch, C came up with another ridiculous idea. He suggested we go investigate B's house. If this were my story, I'd let C meet a fitting end for all his nonsense, haha. Aren't you scared yet, C? M asked. It was just a close call. Besides, now that B's been banished, there's nothing to fear. D's left eye can usually spot spirits. He just couldn't see Miss H because she was too powerful. But generally, ghosts are just like ordinary people. You can avoid them, C said. Forget it, man. Yesterday, I wet my pants, V replied. C didn't back down. What, are you scared? If it weren't for me, you wouldn't even know half of what we know now. Everyone started to consider his suggestion, and he continued, we'll go during the day, so there's no danger. His words carried weight. No matter what he said, everyone seemed to listen. My mom overheard us planning and warned, don't be foolish and get yourselves into danger. This isn't your fight. But we went ahead anyway. It seemed like nothing could deter us. Around 1 p.m., C, the ringleader, arrived on time, carrying bags of children's urine. He claimed that his granddad told him that ghosts feared urine. Smart, huh? We reached B's house, but the doors were locked tight with no way in. We decided to sneak in through the backyard where there was a small dog door. Luckily, the back door wasn't locked, so we crawled through it. Inside, the air was damp and cold, sending shivers down my spine. We assumed B had been dealt with, so we weren't too worried. This time, we stuck together, not wanting to separate. Everyone was talking, waiting for the priest to return, hoping he would come by the afternoon. After we finished lunch, C had another one of his ridiculous ideas. He suggested we go to B's house to investigate. If this were my story, I'd make sure C had a close call with death. Haha. Aren't you scared yet, C? M asked. A minor mishap, that's all. Besides, B has been banished, so there's nothing to worry about. D's left eye couldn't see Miss H because she was too strong, but normally it can spot spirits. It's like dealing with regular people. You can avoid them, C replied. Forget it, man. I already wet my pants yesterday, V said. You all need to be more grateful. If it weren't for me, we'd still be in the dark about a lot of things, C said, attempting to justify his daring behavior. After some debate, he continued, let's go during the day, so there's nothing to fear. For some reason, whatever C said, people seemed to listen. We decided to meet at 1 p.m. to go to B's house. My mom overheard our conversation and yelled from the kitchen, don't be foolish and get yourselves into trouble. This isn't your battle. Despite her warning, we carried on. It seemed like nothing could stop us, not even a bolt of lightning. At 1 p.m., C, our ringleader, arrived on time, carrying bags of children's urine, claiming his grandfather said ghosts fear urine. Clever, huh? We got to B's house, but the doors were tightly locked, with no way in. We sneaked around to the backyard, where there was a dog door. Thankfully, the back door wasn't locked, so we squeezed through. Inside, the air was damp and cold, sending chills down my spine. We assumed B had been dealt with, so we felt less scared. This time, we stuck together, learning from our past mistakes. After a while, I started feeling lightheaded, so I sat down. C noticed and came over to support me. Maybe I was still weak from the blood loss. As I rested, we heard a loud clatter from the kitchen, like pots and pans falling. Having encountered ghosts the night before, we were a bit braver. We observed for a while and found a rat, breathing a sigh of relief. But for some reason, I kept getting these splitting headaches, and despite the heat of the day, it felt unnaturally cold. I saw the others feeling uneasy too. C glanced at me, knowing what I was about to do. I used my left eye to scan the room, but there were only faint spirits outside, nothing inside. However, there was a strange smell. I told him, "There's a weird smell in here. We should find the source." C helped me up, and I led the group to B's bedroom. The air seemed to concentrate in that room, but there was nothing visible. We started searching around. The room was dim, so M reached for the light switch, and the bright light revealed the entire room. After searching for a while and finding nothing, my headache grew more intense. V got so tired he sat down by the wardrobe, noticing it had wheels. Usually, wardrobes didn't have wheels, and the floor around it seemed cleaner than the rest of the house. Curious, V called over the others to help push the wardrobe aside, revealing a hidden trapdoor. It led to a basement. We decided to go down, even though it was risky. We carefully descended into the basement and fumbled around until we found a light switch. A 220-watt bulb lit up the entire space, revealing charms, jars filled with pickled snakes, and other oddities. It was fascinating to explore, given that none of us had seen anything like it before. When we reached the jar in the corner, M screamed. Inside the jar was a human head wrapped with a charm. It turned out B practiced black magic. The jar was labeled fetus witchcraft, not enough ingredients yet. This meant the head belonged to Miss H's baby. The realization made me shiver. Just as we were processing this, a phone rang, startling everyone. It rang for a while, but nobody dared pick it up. C mustered his courage and lifted the receiver to his ear. "Hello?" he said cautiously. He cleared his throat and then said, "What's taking you so long? We haven't heard from you in weeks. How far along are you?" A woman's voice yelled from the other end. "I'm almost done," came the reply. "Hurry it up. If it weren't for your demand for 50 million in that fetus, I wouldn't have had someone cut open H to take her baby and give it to you. If you let this leak, we're both dead." I know. Get it done right. Don't mess up, or this will all come crashing down. Click. The call ended. Everyone stood there, stunned. It was beyond anything we could have imagined. Now we had a clear lead. We just needed to alert the police and trace the phone number to find the woman involved in all of this. As the call ended, I felt dizzy, my head spinning. It seemed like the negative energy here was too strong, pressing down on me and making me feel nauseous. Seeing my state, the others quickly helped me outside. It was a relief to be out in the fresh air, away from that stifling place. The air was so refreshing. It almost made me feel young and vibrant again. By then it was around 4 in the afternoon, just as the priest was arriving at the village head's house. To my surprise, it was none other than Mr. Kháu. He waved me over and explained that after the stone was sealed, his family moved away, so when people came looking for him, he was gone. Hearing about the events from everyone, he agreed to help out and came back to the village. We quickly shared with Mr. Kháu everything we had found out. He told us we needed to wait until the 15th, when the lunar cycle would be at its peak, the strongest time for spirits, which was when Miss H's spirit would be at its most dangerous. I asked him, why the army of spirits? He explained that he was a shaman who used an army of spirits to capture malevolent ghosts, using them to seal those who died at inauspicious times. But unlike other shamans who used these spirits to harm people, he only used them to protect and save others. This made everyone feel a bit more at ease, knowing he wasn't out to hurt anyone. Then he took out a talisman and said, each talisman can summon hundreds of spirit soldiers. To capture a demon, especially one as cunning as this female demon, you'd need tens of thousands. He then told everyone to prepare the materials for a bagua formation. I won't go into detail about this part, since it's similar to the rectangular setup described earlier, with stakes and ropes, except this one is in the shape of a bagua with a central pole to balance yin and yang energies. After consulting his calculations, he said, "This demon is cunning. We'll need something to lure her out." C suggested, "Why don't we go to B's house and get the jar with Miss H's head?" The priest thought it was a good idea and assigned someone to get it while he set up everything else. Once the tasks were assigned, he looked at me and asked me to open my eyes so he could inspect them. After examining me, he said, "Your eye is only half open. It can see spirits, but not the realm of the dead. To fully open it, you'll need to go through a ritual when you turn 18, allowing the spirits to awaken your vision and hearing to see into the other world. There are many levels to the other world, and each has different abilities." I shared the events of the previous night with him, asking, "Why did my blood make Miss H so scared?" He thought for a moment, then went to his bag and took out a pot with a strange-looking plant. He asked for a bowl of chicken blood and added a few drops of my blood to it, then poured it over the plant. Within moments, the plant began to sway and looked greener, almost rejuvenated. This was strange, so he explained it was a blood-fed plant that he had cultivated. He said to grow this plant, you needed soil made from crushed apple tree wood mixed with sand, with no impurities or manure. For the first 7 days, he'd recite a mantra to the plant every hour. By the 99th day, if it was still alive, the exorcism was considered successful. If it died after the 99th day, its spirit would attach to him for protection or to attack others at his command. The power of a failed plant wasn't as strong, but if a plant survived past 3 years, it would be truly formidable. The longer it lived, the stronger it became, and it was used to measure the strength and magic power of the shaman cultivating it. A weak shaman might only keep a plant alive for a year, a mid-level shaman for 3 years, but a powerful one could keep it alive for decades. Then he told me that my blood had a unique quality that frightened spirits, but could also be used to cultivate the strongest plants, the blood-fed ones. If I had this plant, no evil force could harm me. I looked at the blood-fed plant and felt a little envious. With my unique blood, I could potentially grow my own blood-fed plant and use it to my advantage. I chuckled quietly at the thought. Noticing my grin, the priest understood what I was thinking and said, "If you want a blood-fed plant, you'll have to find it yourself. You can't just take someone else's. When a shaman cultivates a blood-fed plant, it gains a soul, much like the relationship between a master and a servant. It will only leave the shaman when the shaman dies, at which point it returns to the wild, where it can merge with another plant, waiting for a new shaman to find it. This is why these plants cannot be propagated. The characteristic of a blood-fed plant is that, even when it hides within another plant, when it blooms, it always produces red flowers. Upon hearing this, I abandoned the idea of having my own blood-fed plant. I figured that having my unique left eye and special blood was enough protection for me. This was definitely a childish way of thinking. We chatted for a while, and soon enough, evening fell, and everyone went home to prepare dinner. It was only 2 days until the 15th of the lunar month, and everyone was eagerly waiting for it. After dinner, I was quite tired and fell asleep quickly. I woke up around 1 a.m. because I needed to use the bathroom. I didn't think much of it, so I ran outside. There's nothing quite like relieving yourself when you need to, with the cool breeze in your face. The rain had stopped, and the stars filled the sky, with the moon perfectly round and bright. As I was enjoying the cool night air, I heard a shrill laugh. Startled, I looked around but didn't see anyone. Suddenly, I felt a chill run down my spine, and then I heard a whisper in my ear. "Hello, one-eyed boy." I jumped and turned around to see the blood-red face of Miss H, inches from mine, before she vanished. I wanted to faint. It was terrifying. My legs felt like they were glued to the ground, and I couldn't scream for help. I heard the laugh again, and when I turned toward it, I saw Miss H sitting on a branch of the tree behind my house. She was laughing and crying at the same time, like a grieving mother who had lost her child. Her expression was intense, filled with hatred. Why did she look so normal when I met her in the woods? Now, she looked like a demon. What had happened to her? How could I help her find peace? I stood there, unable to move, as she spoke. "Do you see what you've done to me?" Then she appeared right in front of me. I noticed that the blood I'd accidentally splattered on her had caused burns that hadn't healed. She spoke again. "It's because of you that I am like this. To heal these burns, I must take the life force from others. You forced me down this path." She laughed again, a chilling laugh that made my skin crawl. But it was unintentional. I hadn't meant to hurt her. "Dee," she said, her tone changing to something more menacing. "I have a gift for you. Use your left eye to see it." When I opened my left eye, I saw my mother's 9 souls. As in many Eastern cultures, a person's soul is believed to be made of multiple parts, all held by Miss H. This was far worse than I could have imagined. My mother's life was in danger. What had happened? How could I prevent this from getting worse? Tears welled in my eyes as my mind raced with terrible thoughts. "Before I deal with your whole family, I'm going to play with you first," she said. "Your mother is to blame for my suffering. She stood by and watched without helping me. On the night that woman came to beat me, I saw your mother watching. I called out to her, hoping for help, but she just turned around and walked away, afraid of getting involved. From that moment, my child and I lost all hope. Now she will pay for what she did by becoming my companion in the afterlife." Before she could finish, I woke up, finding it was already past 1 a.m. I rushed to my parents' room, only to find my father awake. I asked him if my mother was okay, and he said she was still asleep, unaware of the nightmare that had just unfolded. I felt relieved, at least for now. Around 8 a.m., C came by to ask if I wanted to grab breakfast and then check out where they were setting up the spiritual formation. I decided to put aside last night's nightmare and headed out with him. We got back home around noon, but my mom hadn't started making lunch yet, and the house was eerily quiet. I called out for her, but she didn't answer. I rang my dad's phone. He said he hadn't seen her when he left for work. Sensing something was wrong, I dashed into my parents' room and found my mom still lying in bed. Panicking, I didn't know what to do except yell for help. When people heard me, they rushed over, asking what was happening. I pointed toward the bedroom, and the guys went in to lift my mom and carry her to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctors couldn't determine why she was in a deep coma. It suddenly hit me. The dream from last night, perhaps Miss H had taken my mom's spirit. C, standing beside me, suggested, "Can you use your left eye to see where her soul is?" I replied, tears streaming down my face. "That only works with the dead. My mom's still alive. I can't see her soul, but if we don't find a way to help her, I'm afraid she'll end up like N." A while later, Mr. Kháu and a few others arrived. After examining the situation, Mr. Kháu said my mom might only have 3 days left, 14th, 15th, and 16th. If her spirit could be retrieved, she'd be saved. Otherwise, there was nothing anyone could do. People who die without their soul intact are lost forever, without any chance of being reborn or visiting their family. The thought of this made me cry even more. The immediate task was to defeat the demon Miss H to save my mom. The pressure was mounting, and everyone was anxious, relying on Mr. Kháu for guidance. Today was already the 14th. There was only one more day. My dad came home, upset but trying to stay strong to support the family. That night, to ensure our safety, Mr. Kháu stayed at our house because we knew that Miss H might come for us. Around 8 p.m., we had dinner. The summer nights were long, so we ate late. By the time we finished cleaning up, it was about 10 p.m. We were watching TV when the electricity started flickering. This hadn't happened before, so I was confused. The lights blinked a few times before going out completely. My dad sent me to get a candle, as it seemed like the entire neighborhood had lost power. I found a candle and lit it, but the flame barely illuminated the room. Suddenly, it went out with a puff. Where did that gust of wind come from? I relit the candle and was about to leave the room when, to my horror, Miss H appeared right in front of me. I screamed and ran out of the room. My dad and Mr. Kháu, hearing my scream, rushed in. I pointed toward the dark room, and my dad grabbed a flashlight to illuminate the space. Suddenly, a sinister laugh echoed through the room. Looking for me? It was Miss H. My dad turned to see her sitting atop a wardrobe, typical of ghosts. They like to perch high. He tried to confront her. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Just visiting," she replied with a sneer. "Leave now. You're not welcome here." "You think I can just leave like that?" Miss H laughed maniacally. Sensing danger, Mr. Kháu began reciting incantations and making hand gestures. Soon, his summoned spirits appeared, filling our house. Ordinary people would just feel a chill, but through my left eye, I could see the spirits battling. It was clear that Miss H was powerful. Mr. Kháu said it was because he hadn't set up a full formation, so his spirits were weak. He told me to find a way to distract Miss H, and while he recited his incantations, I should use my blood to weaken her. I sneaked to the back of the room, looking for a sharp object to draw blood. I found a candle, but had no knife or needle, so I bit into my finger. It wasn't as easy as it seemed in the movies. I had to bite down hard to draw blood, feeling pain shoot through me. Once I got a few drops, I rubbed them on the candle and made my way back. Seeing this, Mr. H understood my intention and motioned for me to throw it at Miss H. She was slightly distracted, so I quickly threw the candle at her. Miss H reflexively caught it, but the moment she touched it, she screamed in agony. It seemed like her hand was burned. She pointed at me and said, "I'll be back." Then she vanished. As soon as Miss H disappeared, everyone let out a sigh of relief. If Mr. Kháu hadn't been there, I doubt my dad and I would have survived that encounter. The three of us looked at each other, drenched in sweat. It was both terrifying and oddly comical, how close we came to losing our lives. Mr. Kháu remarked that in all his years, he'd never faced a demon as powerful as this one. Perhaps her pain and resentment were so intense that even using 4 or 5 talismans couldn't subdue her. The three of us went to the table to sit down. Thankfully, the electricity came back on. I couldn't imagine staying awake all night without power. I was relieved, but also worried about my mom's safety. I asked Mr. Kháu if she was safe at the hospital. Hearing my question, Mr. Kháu recalled something. He stood up and found a small chest containing a plant, perhaps an herb, along with a talisman. He instructed my dad to take some blood from a rooster and mix it with his own blood to water the plant. While he chanted, the talisman turned red and glowed for a moment before fading. Mr. Kháu handed the talisman to my dad and took out a small iron rod, onto which he also placed my blood. He gave both items to my dad and instructed him to rush to the hospital to watch over my mom. He warned that if Miss H took the remaining 3 souls from my mom, there would be no saving her. My dad didn't waste any time. He got on his motorbike and sped to the hospital. After my dad left, I asked Mr. Kháu, "Aren't the talismans supposed to be ineffective?" He explained, "Normally, yes, but I chanted an incantation that infused the talisman with the spirit of the herb. It will protect your mom." "And what about you? Aren't you afraid?" I inquired. He laughed and replied, "I'm quite sure Miss H won't return here. She's too afraid of me. But if she does, I'll be ready. Besides, you have your special blood, don't you?" I just lost a lot of blood, and he still had the audacity to joke about it. Nice, huh? I just chuckled, trying not to say anything. It was getting late, so we went to bed early to get some rest. The following day was the day everyone was preparing to face the challenge. Mr. Kháu and I gathered everyone at the community center for a meeting. You could see the anxiety on everyone's faces, and I couldn't blame them. When your life is on the line, who wouldn't be scared? If something went wrong, who knows what could happen? By 8 a.m., everyone had gathered. Mr. Kháu started calculating and then stepped outside to examine the geography and geomancy. After a while, he instructed everyone to dig a circular pit in Miss H's backyard, where she used to stay. It was the perfect spot because it had good energy and was where the currents of yin and yang intersected. At the bottom of the pit, he placed a special stone known as a midday, made from crushed black herb designed to absorb evil energy. He had 4 wooden stakes placed around it, with a central iron stake at the middle. The top was covered with a large mirror with a hole in the center to insert the iron stake. He then sent a team down to Mr. B's basement to retrieve the jar containing Miss H's head, instructing them to place a talisman on it to contain its energy. This way, Miss H wouldn't sense it. Before everything was set in motion, Mr. Kháu was concerned about the black cat. Why did it always appear when Miss H did? Was there something special about it? Although he was curious, he didn't dwell on it. Everything was organized, with everyone knowing their roles, and then I headed to the hospital with my friends and Mr. Kháu to check on my mom. When we arrived, she was still stable, but my dad was taking a nap. We were a bit loud, so he woke up. We started chatting with Mr. Kháu about the recent events. My dad recounted how he got to the hospital just in time to use the talisman on my mom, then went outside to get some fresh air. While he was outside, he sensed the danger, heard some strange noises, and then saw a black cat emerge from the darkness, seemingly out of nowhere. Going downstairs to buy a bottle of water, I noticed the power outage, which gave me a bad feeling. I rushed back up to find Miss H performing a ritual, attempting to capture my wife's soul. The talisman on my wife pushed her away when she touched it. Grabbing the rod covered with my blood, I lunged at her, striking her hand with the iron point. She let out a scream of agony and vanished. I was so startled that I waited until around 5 a.m., when there were more people and roosters crowing before I dared to sleep. The priest said, "I knew it. Those kinds of vengeful spirits are unpredictable." We talked for a while, and then the community leader invited the priest over for lunch before setting up the formation. The priest reminded my dad to take care of my mom while he dealt with summoning her soul. My dad felt relieved hearing this. After lunch, we all headed back to Miss H's house to continue the preparations. The blazing sun made everyone feel drained and lethargic. Mr. Kháu jumped into the pit and pulled out a red yarn from his pocket, tying 4 stakes together before attaching one end to the tip of the iron rod. He carefully positioned the Machna stone to ensure it could absorb the malevolent energy and trap Miss H. Then he pasted 4 talismans on the 4 stakes to activate his ritual. Finally, he instructed everyone to place a large circular mirror with a hole in the center over the pit and install 8 stakes along the 8 edges of the octagonal formation. He told everyone to use black dog blood to draw the yin-yang symbol and place the fetus jar at the entrance. He told them to wait for his signal to remove the talisman. Everything was ready by dusk. People were assigned to guard the formation, while others returned home to wash up and eat a hearty dinner. You never know, if we died, at least we'd be well-fed ghosts. By 11 p.m., the sky was filled with stars, the moon was shining brightly, and a gentle breeze was blowing, creating an eerie atmosphere with the chirping insects. Everyone gathered in front of Miss H's house. I stood behind the priest, holding my mom's shirt, ready to raise it if Miss H brought my mom's soul back. Inside the shirt was a talisman to capture her soul. At 11:59 p.m., Mr. Kháu signaled to remove the yellow cloth covering the fetus jar and the talisman. As soon as it was removed, a pungent stench filled the air, making everyone uncomfortable. A moment later, the wind picked up and the insects fell silent. The eerie silence was broken by a high-pitched laugh, announcing Miss H's arrival. She was sitting on the rooftop, drawn by the scent of the fetus. She looked around, searching for her child. Upon seeing the jar, she screamed in distress and jumped down. Tears streamed from her eyes as she wailed. "My child, is this all that's left of you? I thought that wretched cat had devoured you. Why is there only your head?" Her cries were heartbreaking, filling us with a mixture of pity and fear. As soon as her hand touched the jar, the protection spell repelled her. She couldn't approach it. She screamed at the priest, "Old man, what do you do to my child?" The priest replied, "Your child has been enchanted. He's been transformed into a fetus charm. Even if he breaks free, he has no soul to be reborn." "Shut up," she shrieked, her hair disheveled, her eyes wild with rage. "Now, if you want to save my child, bring me the soul of Dee's mom." Driven by grief, Miss H wasn't thinking clearly. She just wanted to hold the head of her child, no matter what. Despite the pain, she laughed with sorrow, extending her hand as if to reach for her child. The priest signaled me to use my ability to see if I could capture my mom's soul. I did as instructed, shouting and throwing the shirt, capturing my mom's soul. Mr. Kháu then attached the red yarn to the jar, pulling it closer to the formation to lure Miss H into it. It worked. She stepped onto the mirror, and the priest began reciting his chants. The talismans and yarns entrapped her, and she struggled, unable to escape. The priest kept chanting, and the stone beneath continued to absorb her energy. The moonlight, reflected off the mirror, combined with the yin-yang energy from the iron rod, creating a powerful force that locked her in place, preventing her from escaping. Miss H seemed to be losing control. "Ha ha ha! Even if I dissolve into nothingness, I'm taking you with me." With those words, she gathered all her energy to lunge forward, grabbing my neck again, but the red string pulled her back. I felt myself leaning toward the formation, unable to break free. If I stayed in there too long, the Makna stone would drain my yang energy and I'd end up with my ancestors. Seeing this, Kháu hesitated. "Keep going. Don't worry about me. Just don't let her escape," I shouted, despite the pain. Kháu nodded and resumed chanting. The rest of the group could only watch and pray while I was growing dizzy from the pressure. The wind picked up and the dogs barked louder, signaling the arrival of the black cat. The situation grew more critical as the cat appeared on the rooftop, growling menacingly. I was barely holding on as Miss H tightened her grip on my neck while I tried to pry her hand off without success. The cat's growling intensified, then it leaped into the formation, biting my hand, causing blood to drip. The blood landed on the mirror, causing it to crack. Seeing this, I flicked blood onto Miss H. The pain from my blood caused her to scream in agony, releasing her grip on me. Both of us fell onto the shattered mirror, which shattered further, exposing the pit. Miss H made contact with the stone and was pulled in, disintegrating. Kháu stopped chanting, signaling that the battle was over. Everyone rushed to lift me out of the pit. Shards of glass had pierced my thigh with blood gushing out. Thang Si quickly bandaged me up. The black cat, fatally wounded by the falling glass, lay lifeless. Kháu instructed the villagers to leave the formation intact, only covering the pit with dirt. Miss H was trapped in the stone, and any disturbance could allow her to escape. Everyone agreed and filled the pit with dirt. I had lost a lot of blood and fainted, so they rushed me to the hospital. The following morning, I awoke to find my mom and others surrounding me. Knowing that my mom was saved and everything was resolved, I felt relieved. Everyone lamented the loss of the black cat, a spiritual guardian from the mountains. It seemed like its death had been a sacrifice to save me. With everything resolved, Kháu instructed the villagers not to tamper with the formation, saying that any disturbance could undo the spell. With that, the town's leader drove him back home. The following morning was peaceful and bright. Although it seemed like everything had concluded, it was just the beginning of more trouble to come. Regarding the matter of the corpulent woman eliminating Miss H, the police investigated and identified the culprits. But due to their connections to high-ranking officials, the matter was hushed up. A day later, I was discharged from the hospital and returned home. Everyone mentioned that the black cat was a sacred animal from the mountains. It had saved me by signaling the danger, and its death was mourned by many. Once everything was sorted out, the shaman advised everyone not to disturb the area to avoid breaking the seal, suggesting they seal it off completely. Afterward, the town chief drove the shaman back home. The following morning was bright and calm. It seemed like everything had concluded, but little did we know that it was only the beginning of more turmoil. Let me tell you about part 3 of this spiritual story. In this part, I play a minor role, with my N taking center stage, the one with the single eye who can see ghosts. People started calling him My N, and so did I. My house is about a block away from where My N lives. He lived in Phobang, while I lived in Phobung. Back then, the two areas were divided, and the youth from the two neighborhoods rarely mixed. If a guy from Phobung went to Phobang to flirt with the girls, he would get beaten up, and vice versa. My house was on the borderline, so everyone knew me, and I could move between the two places without getting into trouble. Phobung had a stream with one side murky and the other clear, with a section called the Orphan's Hole. The current in this section was turbulent and icy cold. Many strong swimmers got caught in this whirlpool and couldn't escape, dragging them down into the depths. If they were lucky, the current would push their bodies back to the surface. This area had taken so many lives that it earned the name Sui Vang to scare off kids and prevent them from wandering too close. The name Sui Vang was fitting. It was like a boundary between two worlds, with two separate streams flowing in opposite directions, one murky and the other clear, never merging. If you visit Kháu, I'll take you there. It never runs dry, even during droughts. I used to take my cows to graze near Sui Vang, while the people from Phobung often grazed their cattle near Dongbao. Like Mayen, I have some spiritual sensitivity, but I'm not as skilled as he is. Because of this, I'm used to seeing ghosts and other paranormal activities. If Mayen can see directly, I can only see indirectly. In other words, I can't look ghosts straight in the eye. If a ghost is in front of me, I have to turn to the right and then glance back to see it, which sort of makes me look cross-eyed, doesn't it? However, my ability only works when the spiritual energy is exceptionally strong, like on the first day of the lunar month or during a full moon. It's as if something activates my senses, allowing me to perceive the supernatural. Knowing I had this unique ability made me curious, so I ventured to the orphan's hole to practice. As expected, this place had a high concentration of spirits due to the many people who had drowned there. They looked haunting, pale skin, bloated bellies, the classic signs of drowning victims. But there was one spirit that stood out among the rest. I suspected he was the leader of this area because he moved swiftly and with authority. The first time I went there, the strong spiritual energy activated my ability. Following the energy, I found a small shrine with an incense bowl and a few cups of water. While I was inspecting it, the atmosphere around me shifted, and I sensed spirits gathering. I glanced left and right to see them surrounding me, but I couldn't see any directly ahead. I thought to myself, if I set foot in the water, I'd surely be dragged under. Better stay away. Turning to my left, I saw a spirit sitting on the shrine. As I was contemplating my next move, other spirits moved in, seemingly intent on dragging me away. That's when the leader spirit intervened, speaking in a soft voice that only I could hear. "Back off, you can't touch this one." At his command, the other spirits vanished, confirming my suspicion that he was the leader. Now that I had his attention, I tried to face him, but he vanished when I looked directly at him. From that day on, I knew I was safe as long as I stayed near him. So I continued visiting the spot to hone my skills and learn about the spirits. Every evening, I returned to the orphan's hole. Initially, the spirits didn't like my presence. They probably felt I was intruding on their territory, but they eventually got used to me. My goal was to approach the leader, but he was elusive. It took several days before he would even acknowledge me. I explained that I couldn't look at him directly because of my unique ability, and after some hesitation, he agreed to meet me. During our initial encounters, I had to sit cross-legged with my hands on my knees and close my eyes to sense his presence. It was difficult, but after about a month, I started to understand his intentions. It was as if he communicated through telepathy, sending thoughts into my mind. Scientists might call this the sixth sense, and while some people are born with it, others, like me, have to develop it through practice. Eventually, I could communicate with the spirits. I asked the leader how he became the head spirit at such a young age. He turned to me and said that when he died, I was still in another life. He'd been dead for over 50 years and had been searching for a suitable replacement so he could move on, but finding the right candidate had proven difficult. He had trained in this spot, earning the title of leader, and explained that if other shamans knew of him, they would call him the local boy. Pointing to the shrine, he said that the man who built it had died over 20 years ago. His son had been pulled under by the leader spirit, but because he wasn't compatible, he couldn't be freed, forcing him to stay. To help his son, the father built the shrine, and from then on, the leader spirit stopped harming people. Over time, as more people died, the leader spirit's role became more significant. He explained that to escape, a drowning spirit must drag someone else under, what some call a water ghost. I asked, why does a drowning ghost have to pull someone else under to be released? He said, those who drown cannot leave the water. They're stuck there. They must find someone to serve as a bridge, like a fishing line that pulls them to shore. Another way is for their family to ask a spiritual guide to call their souls back, but that's rare, which is why the number of drowning victims here is increasing. Then he explained that I was the second person he'd encountered with a unique spiritual connection. People with this connection often serve as intermediaries between the living and the dead. He had once rescued a person from drowning, hoping they would show gratitude and maintain the shrine, offering incense on the 1st and 15th days of the lunar calendar. However, years had passed without a single visit, so he had sent his followers to search for that person. This turned out to be my N, though I didn't know it at the time. Hearing this, I assured him that when I grew older, I would visit the shrine regularly to offer incense. He just chuckled. Here's a tip. Never promise anything to spirits or deities if you can't follow through, or you'll be in debt forever. Now, I still have to visit the Thuithun shrine at the Temple of the Second Lady every full moon and new moon to keep my promise. Time passed, and a year had gone by since the events surrounding Aunt H. The initial gossip faded, and fewer people mentioned her. I visited the orphan's hole less often, usually once or twice a week since I had school to focus on. The time frame I'm describing is a year after Aunt H's incident, around 2011. One Saturday after school, I decided to head to the orphan's hole to relax. I sat on a rock, enjoying the scenery, when I heard voices nearby, sounding a bit scared. I peeked over the edge and saw two boys about my age. One was small and timid, the other was bigger, dark-skinned, and had a tough demeanor. They seemed to notice me, pointing and whispering to each other. I figured they were from the neighboring village, Boom. Why were they here? Didn't they know it was dangerous? I decided to intervene to avoid any accidents, but first, I thought it would be fun to scare them. Since I knew the terrain well and could move quickly without falling, I figured it was safe to play a prank. I messed up my hair, smeared some dirt on myself, and made ghostly noises to startle them. Honestly, I'm not sure what I was thinking. I moved quickly, jumping from one rock to another. The larger boy held a stick, ready to defend himself as I approached. I stuck my tongue out and leaned close to the smaller boy, shouting, "Boo!" He was so startled that he screamed at the top of his lungs, and I felt triumphant. But then the larger boy swung his stick at me, hitting me hard on the head. "What's your problem, dude?" he said. "You know who my friend is?" Stunned, I replied, "Who are you calling dude? Don't you know who I am? I'm the ghost of this place." He hit me again. "Ghost, my ass. My friend could kick your butt." If I wasn't recounting actual events, I would have written his character off by now. He hit me so hard my head swelled. Before he could hit me again, the smaller boy stepped in, saying, "Forget this idiot. Let's just do what we came here to do." They completely ignored me after that. I felt a mix of embarrassment and anger, determined to get back at them. The smaller boy seemed to be searching for something, closing one eye while looking around, like he was trying to find someone. Despite my headache, I planned my revenge. I crept up behind him and tapped him on the shoulder to startle him. The poor boy got so scared that he nearly fell into the river. This time, I could see the smaller guy was really panicking, even breathing heavily. I was worried he might burst a blood vessel or something, so I rushed over. The big guy, seeing this, lost it and was about to whack me again, but I quickly explained, "Hey, are you okay? This place is dangerous. I just pretended to be a ghost to scare you guys away from here." The big guy snapped and yelled at me, "What the hell are you doing, huh?" "Okay, dude, I literally just said I was pretending to be a ghost." I tried to speak, but I was tongue-tied. He continued, "Everyone can tell you're just a regular guy. My friend checked you out the moment you started hopping around like a lunatic. Ghosts don't jump around like maggots." Man, the way he scolded me felt really harsh. And for what? I was just kidding around. I stayed quiet as the big guy helped the smaller one up. The smaller guy was about to stand when the big one slipped and fell. He started shouting for help, and I was like, "Oh, great! Now this guy is in trouble too." The current had pushed him away from the shore, and he was struggling. I started to panic. "What do we do now? He's being pulled toward the deep spot," I said. The smaller guy didn't say a word, just closed one eye, then opened the other, like he was trying to focus. Then he screamed, "He's being pulled down by a water spirit. What do we do?" Hearing the word spirit, I suddenly remembered my practice. I quickly sat down, crossed my legs, and focused my energy. Meanwhile, the big guy was still yelling and cursing at me for not helping. "Hey, calm down. I need to meditate to communicate with the spirits and ask them to let him go," I snapped. He was taken aback and quieted down. I started meditating, trying to reach out to the local spirits, asking them to spare my new friends. I was still focusing when the big guy screamed again. "He's sinking! He's going undersea! What the heck are you doing? Meditating? Do something!" I got up and told the smaller guy to follow me, and I led him to where the big guy was being dragged by the current. It took us about 5 minutes to get there. I thought for sure he was a goner, but when we got there, he had washed ashore, unconscious but still breathing. The smaller guy started to run toward him, but I stopped him. "Don't. Going near him could make things worse," I said. I hurried over and began administering CPR, pressing on his chest. After a few moments, he coughed up some water and slowly regained consciousness. When he did, I told the smaller guy that it was okay to come over. The two reunited, hugging like long-lost brothers. The smaller guy looked around and seemed to remember something. Then his expression became blank. By then, it was around 5 p.m., and the sky had turned gloomy. The wind was picking up. The big guy eventually stood up, thanked me, and told the smaller one, "I don't think we'll see anything tonight. Let's head back and try again tomorrow." The smaller guy nodded and turned to thank me before heading off in the opposite direction. Before I left, I shouted my thanks to the spirits and promised to bring offerings of incense and candies to the spot tomorrow. Then, I headed home. The next day, I woke up late and had a huge lunch before taking a nap. I must have dozed off because I heard a faint voice calling my name. "Dee Dee, wake up, help my friend." The voice was so faint, I thought I was dreaming, so I just ignored it and went back to sleep. When I woke up, I found myself sitting up, which was weird because I didn't remember doing that. I heard a knocking sound at the door, but when I went to check, no one was there. I went back inside, and the knocking started again, louder this time. I ran out, opened the door, nothing. Maybe it was some kids playing a prank. This time, I decided to hide and catch them. I stood by the door, waiting. After a while, I thought they'd left, so I started to walk away when suddenly there was a loud banging, like someone was smashing the door with a hammer. Enraged, I yanked the door open to see who it was, but a cold gust of wind rushed in, bringing an unusual chill. Was this really a ghost playing tricks in broad daylight? I took a moment to focus, then turned my head to the left, and there she was, a female ghost standing at the door, facing me with her tongue sticking out. It startled me. If I had faced her directly, I might have passed out on the spot. Fortunately, my ability only allows me to see indirectly, so I wasn't completely terrified. You think you can scare me? You're way out of your league. I spun around and stumbled backward into the house, bumping my foot against a chair, sending waves of pain shooting through my leg. The ghost just laughed heartily. Oh, great, now I'm providing comic relief for her. She looked to be about my age, maybe younger, but why was she still lingering here? What did she want? I didn't owe her anything. Anyway, I decided to meditate and try to communicate with her. She said she wanted me to help her friend, but who was her friend? She explained that her friend was one of the two guys I helped at Suivang yesterday. She had seen me scaring her friend, so she wanted to give me a taste of my own medicine. Heh, if I had my end's blood, I'd send you packing by now. Mentioning yesterday reminded me that I had promised to bring offerings, so I hurried to get everything ready. It was almost 3 p.m. When I got there, the place was empty. I set up the offerings and lit 3 incense sticks, and then the two guys showed up. I ran over to them and said, "What are you two doing here? Didn't you almost drown yesterday?" C laughed. "I do what I want. Who are you to tell me where I can go? You don't own this place. Hey, if I hadn't saved you yesterday, you'd be floating down the river Styx by now. Don't get cocky." "Hey," I retorted. C lunged at and gave me a shove, sending me sliding down the embankment into the water. I was furious, shouting at him. In hindsight, it wasn't smart to provoke someone who was bigger and stronger. Luckily, he didn't punch me, just looked at me with a blank expression, then asked, "Wait, you fell into the water and didn't get pulled down by spirits?" "Only idiots get dragged down," I replied. "Spirits know who to pull under, and you're at the top of their list." The smaller guy rushed over, pulling me out of the water and apologizing on behalf of his friend. Good guy. I climbed up, soaked and shivering from the cold wind. I watched the two of them as they kept searching for something. The smaller guy kept closing one eye and opening the other. I asked, "What are you two looking for?" C snapped, "Not your business." Right? What was I thinking? Getting into their business? Why is your friend squinting like that? Does he see better with one eye? I asked. C shot me a death glare, and I backed off. After a while, the smaller guy said he didn't think they would find anything today, so they started heading home. I decided to follow them, curious about their search. They asked why I was following, and I replied that I just wanted to know what they were looking for. C rolled his eyes and told me to go home. I started walking home, but halfway there, a strong wind picked up, and it got freezing cold. I was already feeling sick from the earlier dunk in the water, but now it was worse. I thought I heard a faint voice in the wind saying, "Thank you," but when I turned around, no one was there. Maybe I was hearing things. That night, I came down with a fever. My mom made me some herbal tea and tucked me in. At around 11 p.m., I woke up to a cold draft coming through the window. I got up to close it, feeling uneasy. I sat down to meditate and turned my head to the side, and there he was, the spirit leader from the Hump of Orphans. He had never come to my house before. Why was he here? He gestured for me to come outside. I knew the drill. I meditated to communicate with him. He said he had come to return my 2 lost soul fragments, which had been pushed out when I fell into the river. The spirits had gathered around them, but when he saw my offering earlier, he decided to return them to me. He He placed the soul fragments back into me, and I felt an immediate sense of relief. Then he disappeared. I closed the window and lay back down, my thoughts swirling. It took a while to fall back asleep after that. As I was dozing off, I heard a tapping at the window, thinking it might be him coming back. I eagerly opened the window, only to find that it was the female ghost again. I sighed and said, "Why are you back here again?" She replied, giggling, "Hey, can you come back tomorrow to help again?" And then she vanished. Damn it, I thought to myself. Just by going there, I caught a cold, and now I'm sick. Do you even understand? I felt frustrated and annoyed, then tried to go back to sleep, knowing I had school in the morning and was feeling too tired. The entire morning at school, I couldn't concentrate, wondering who those two guys were and why that ghost girl kept asking for help. My mind kept drifting, thinking about the one-eyed boy. Was he the one everyone was talking about? The boy who could see ghosts? I thought about how he squinted with one eye, and curiosity got the best of me. I decided to go back to the haunted area that afternoon to find out more. The afternoon heat was unbearable, a scorching sun that could fry an egg. I dashed home and found my mom setting the table for lunch. Ah, the luxury of coming home to a meal already prepared. I had lunch, then took a nap, planning to head out by 1 p.m., but somehow I dozed off and didn't wake up until 3 p.m. Apparently, I could fall asleep just about anywhere. I quickly washed my face to wake up and rushed out. When I got to the haunted area, I was surprised to see so many people, 4 or 5 of them. C, the big guy, asked, "Where's that annoying kid? Thought he would show up for M to meet him." "Stop acting like I'm obsessed with boys. I only came because you guys mentioned him so much," M replied. "Oh, great. Now they're talking trash about me." I noticed the one-eyed boy looking around with one eye closed. I approached him. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "Aha, here he is," C said. M glanced at me and just smiled. The one-eyed boy explained that he was looking for someone. "There's no one here," I said. "I've been here often, and it's mostly just ghosts." My words seemed to grab their attention, and they gathered around me. "Have you seen him?" M asked. "Seen who?" "The spirit that rules this place," M replied. "Ah, him. He doesn't show up often these days. I guess he's busy," I said, trying to sound knowledgeable. The one-eyed boy seemed curious and told me his name was D, Mayen, and that he could see spirits with one eye. He introduced the others, CMV, the guy splashing in the water, and T, the one sitting quietly. D told me that lately, spirits had been visiting him, claiming he owed them something. He was unsure what they meant, so he just ignored them, knowing he had some sort of protection against evil spirits. But over the past week, more and more spirits had shown up, haunting him every night. It was becoming exhausting. So he asked them what debt they were talking about. The spirits said they were collecting on behalf of their master, who wanted to meet him. That led them to this haunted area. That's when I remembered what the spirit leader had told me. He once saved someone who was like me, but they never came back to show gratitude. The spirit leader sent his minions to find this person, leading them to D. As we were talking, the wind started rustling the leaves, and I heard a faint giggle. I turned my head to check, and there was the female ghost standing by a tree in the distance. Mayen also noticed her and said, "That's N. Why is she here?" Mine couldn't communicate with N, so I tried to help. I could see them, but to communicate, I had to meditate and focus my thoughts. The others, however, had no clue I was talking to spirits. They just saw me turning my head and thought I was being weird or creeping on M. C, especially, gave me a death glare, as if he was ready to pick a fight. Since my N couldn't interact with the spirit, I decided to try my method to see if I could communicate with her. Let me try. I closed my eyes to concentrate, then relayed what En had told me. She said she saw my En being harassed by spirits collecting debts. They didn't explain what they meant, so En went around asking other spirits for help. But this area is controlled by water spirits, and she couldn't enter or find the leader to seek guidance. While wandering, she saw my En and C being scared off by me. Knowing my connection with the spirits here, she decided to follow me and ask for my help. As I finished talking, En suddenly vanished without a trace. My En looked puzzled, asking how I understood En when she didn't say anything. I explained that I could communicate with spirits by reading their thoughts. This revelation surprised the group. As we were talking, C mentioned, "Hey, where's V?" "He's playing in the water down there," M replied. The group went silent, realizing something was wrong. We all rushed to where V was playing, and sure enough, he was struggling in the water, unable to get back to shore. Panic set in as everyone started shouting for help. C, without thinking, dove into the water to rescue him. I yelled, "Don't! The water spirits will grab you too." But C ignored my warning. In the chaos, my En asked M to give him a sickle. M quickly handed it over, and my En sliced his own palm, letting blood drip onto the blade. He instructed T to swim out and pass it to C, telling him to dip the bloody blade into the water if he needed to fight off the spirits. If he reached V and couldn't bring him back, the blood would help. T nodded and jumped in, but everyone was anxious, watching as the situation escalated. My En told M to run back for help in case things got worse. The unpredictability of water spirits made everything even more nerve-wracking. As T swam towards C, C started to struggle, being pulled underwater despite his strength and swimming skills. My En screamed, realizing the spirits were dragging him down. He dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face, saying it was too late to save V. The water spirits had already taken him as a replacement. "Hurry up, T. C is struggling to stay afloat." But T wasn't faring much better. It was like an invisible force was holding him back. C had narrowly escaped the water spirit's grip once before. Could he do it again? The spirits seemed determined to pull him under this time. C struggled for a moment, then managed to dip the handle of the sickle into the water. The blood seeped out, creating a buffer that seemed to lessen the spirit's grip. He quickly swam towards C. The moment he broke through the water's resistance, T reached C, but they both kept getting pulled back. Meanwhile, V was drifting further into the whirlpool. My En shouted in desperation, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Keep going! If you can't save him, save yourself!" I felt helpless, seeing the spirits ignore my pleas. It was like they were too focused on their prey to heed my words. My En closed his eyes, focusing on his powers. He dipped his bleeding hand into the water, letting the blood flow. Screams echoed in my ears, loud enough to make me wince. The spirits were reacting, but to get the blood to where it could help T and C, we needed much more of it. The tension was mounting. T knew he had to make a choice. Save himself and C, or risk their lives for V, who might already be dead. He submerged the sickle, creating a protective field of blood, allowing them to swim freely. C wanted to go after V, but T held him back. It was too dangerous. What if it was a trap to lure more victims? From the beginning, we hadn't heard a single word from V. No cries for help, nothing. Even if he was still alive, there was no protection left to save him. They had no choice but to retreat. T told C, and with a heavy heart, C stopped fighting. His eyes were red with anger and sorrow. He felt utterly powerless. My En screamed, "Get out of there! Now!" They swam as fast as they could, reaching the shore just in time. The protective blood barrier was nearly gone. As they climbed out, they saw V's body sink, a haunting sight that would stay with them forever. My En and I rushed to check on C and T. When we reached them, they were shaken but alive. We ran back to the whirlpool to search for V. The surface was eerily still, the whirlpool churning relentlessly. Rain clouds gathered, casting a dark shadow over everything. Mayen used his ability to scan the water. He saw several spirits circling beneath the surface, 10 to be exact. It was a grim sight. I glanced over at the shrine and noticed that the leader had appeared. Mayen also saw him, but he was too shocked over his friend's situation to say anything. I asked the leader why he didn't intervene to save V, and he just smiled, saying that he only saved those who were chosen. One life could lead to the release of 10 spirits, so he chose to stay out of it. Then he vanished. Soon, people arrived but couldn't find V. They shouted and brought boats and nets to search for the body. V's family, overcome with grief, lashed out at us, blaming us for his death, asking why we hadn't saved him. They said it was because of us that he was gone. It took a while for others to calm them down, explaining that it was an accident and we were just kids. We couldn't control what had happened. But no one really knew that it could have easily been 3 bodies instead of 1. The adults led us home, leaving the search and other arrangements to them. When I got home, my mom scolded me harshly, warning me never to go near that place again. I nodded and agreed, then took a bath and had dinner. Around 8 p.m., my dad got a call asking him to bring me to the police station for questioning. When we got there, I saw the rest of the group. We recounted the events, and the final conclusion was that V had drowned. After giving our statements, the adults stayed behind while we were told to go home. As we left the station, I asked, "Did they find V's body?" "No, they've been searching since the evening, but haven't found anything," M replied. Everyone was quiet and downcast. We walked for a while, then the adults suggested we go home, but C had an idea. "How about we go back to the stream and search for V? With Mayan's ability, we might be able to find him. Aren't you afraid to go out there at night?" M asked. "I think after everything that's happened, there's not much left to fear," C replied. I asked, "So you guys were involved in that whole thing with the evil spirit from Fobung?" "Yeah, that's right. It was a huge fight with the spirit, and Mayen almost died," T answered quickly. I said, "Wow, that's intense. You guys are amazing. Well, let's head to the stream before it gets too late. If we're too late, they might come looking for us." We headed out, and I had a conversation with Mayen about the whole blood incident. He explained everything to me, and it made sense. The deeper we went, the more eerie it felt. Walking this path during the day was fine, but at night, it felt different. The overgrown vegetation and the dim light from our flashlights made everything seem ominous. We stuck close together, feeling the wind pick up and a chill in the air. The atmosphere was tense. I clung to Mayen, along with the others, because standing alone seemed like a sure way to get dragged away by something unseen. The wind howled, and the insects went silent, signaling that something was coming. C asked, "So you're actually scared, D?" I replied. "What do you mean, actually scared? You think I'm fearless?" C laughed, and I said, "Of course I'm scared. I'm not like Mayen. I have to concentrate to see spirits, and if I'm not focused, I might get hurt. It's not like I can just look and see them at will." C nodded, understanding. Then Mayen stopped, sensing something. Everyone looked around, trying to find the source of the disturbance. Suddenly, N appeared, sending a shiver down my spine. Mayen began to communicate with her, and she pointed toward me. I understood her signal. I sat down to meditate and connected with her. Here's what I relayed to the group. N says that to find V's body, we need to find the leader of this area and ask him to perform a ritual to bring V's body to the surface. Otherwise, we won't find him. He's been hidden. My N asked why N vanished earlier when we were talking. N explained that she was trapped in the underworld due to her double death and could only escape for a short time to warn us. Since V's death also involved a double death, she couldn't go near that place. Once N finished speaking, she disappeared. We all rushed to the riverbank, where we saw a crowd of people gathered, searching and calling out. My N scanned the area and said he couldn't find V. What should we do now? I told the group I could try to summon the leader since everyone was focusing their search around the whirlpool and no one could go out and light incense to call him. I sat down and focused my thoughts to find him. After what seemed like an eternity, about an hour, I finally made contact. When he appeared, My N also noticed him. "What do you want with me?" he asked. "I need your help," I quickly replied. "What is it?" "Could you help us bring V's body to the surface? Please, have some compassion. We are mere mortals, unable to navigate this spirit world. We're relying on your help." He smiled at my plea and then glanced at My N. "Do you remember me?" he asked. "Yes," My N replied. "Do you remember what you promised me?" "Yes." "Then why haven't you done it?" "I forgot," My N answered. Seeing the tension in the air, I stepped in to ease the situation. "Please don't hold it against my friend. He just lost a friend today and is very distressed. Please don't take offense. We really need your help to find our friend. Leaving him alone at the bottom of the river is too painful for us mortals." "You have a way with words," he remarked, with a slight grin. Then he turned to My N again. "So, what do you intend to do?" I nudged My N to signal he should be more respectful and persuasive. My N got the hint. "I didn't understand when I was a child. I thought it was all a dream. When you sent your spirits to find me, I realized that you were real. I came here to fulfill my promise, but now this tragedy happened. I promise I will honor my words if you help us bring V back." He's bold for making such promises. I've always been told not to make promises to spirits unless you can keep them. The leader smiled. "I'll help you this time, but remember what you promised." "I can vouch for that," I added. The leader stood up and mumbled a few words, then waved his hand. "Please wait. I have more questions," I said. "What is it?" he replied. "This afternoon, My N mentioned that V was pulled down to replace someone. How did 10 spirits manage to be freed?" "That's because when a spirit breaks free, there are 3 parts of the soul and 7 of the spirit. If they're not rejoined, they can be taken by other spirits looking to ascend. If they reunite, then only one spirit is freed. By now, you should bring a priest to call V's soul back, so he doesn't turn into a river spirit." With that, he vanished. At that moment, we heard shouts from the other side. They had found V's body. We all breathed a sigh of relief and ran to see. V's parents were there too, but people tried to keep them from seeing the body. They insisted on seeing their son one last time, rushing past everyone. When they reached V, he coughed up blood. It was a heartbreaking scene. Everyone felt deep sorrow. They said when a drowned person sees their loved ones, the soul relives the pain of dying unjustly. It's quite peculiar how V died while hunched over. Yet after spending 5 to 6 hours underwater, there wasn't a drop of water in his stomach. Because he'd been underwater for so long and was sitting in a bent position, it was difficult to straighten his body out. V's grandfather had to use a machete to pry open his mouth and pour in some liquor before he could gradually straighten out. V's mother screamed and fainted at the sight of her son. What a heartbreaking scene. We followed the crowd home to prepare for the funeral the following morning. The next morning, I asked my mom if I could skip school to attend the wake, and she agreed. I hurried over to meet my new group of friends. It felt nice to connect with people who understood me. When I got there, the others were waiting for me to go in together to pay our respects. We each contributed 10,000 dong to put in the envelope and burned some incense sticks, bowing a few times. I was too scared to look directly at V's portrait. Honestly, I didn't know much about V. We had just started to get acquainted when he died, so my expression was relatively neutral, lacking any real emotion. However, everyone else looked somber and downcast. Seeing the gloomy atmosphere, I tried to break the silence by starting a conversation. Mayen, do you think we should tell them about the need to summon V's soul to prevent him from becoming a water spirit? We should wait until after the funeral, Mayen replied. After we finished the funeral rites, the group got together to discuss how to inform V's family about the situation. We were unsure how to make them believe us. Just tell them the truth, suggested C. Tell them that N told us, since everyone knows about Mayen's ability to see spirits, and that he helped fight the evil spirit in B's house, he added. It seemed like a reasonable plan, so we all agreed to go and explain the situation to V's family. When we approached V's parents, we conveyed everything we knew. V's mother was inconsolable, lying in bed and crying, while V's father was busy with arrangements, visibly heartbroken. The relatives suggested inviting the spirit medium who dealt with Mr. B, saying she was the only one powerful enough. The entire neighborhood agreed. The next morning was Saturday. After finishing my morning chores and eating lunch, I went to V's house, where I saw they had already invited the medium. She was sitting with Mayen and the others. I tried to sneak in quietly to eavesdrop on the conversation, but the medium saw me and beckoned me over, saying, "You, like Mayen, can communicate with spirits, but this time only you can help." I was a bit confused, as I was just there to listen, not to participate. So I asked, "Why don't you ask Mayen? He's much more experienced than I am. It takes me a while to get in touch with spirits." Mayen can't help because the spirits in this area are familiar with you, and you often offer incense to them. You're the only one who can present offerings to the river spirit to gain his favor. "How did you know I often light incense?" I asked, bewildered. The medium pointed out the window where someone was standing. Mayen clarified, "That's the leader of the spirits at the whirlpool." I wasn't sure what to say, but before I could respond, everyone started encouraging me to help out. With so much pressure, I reluctantly agreed. The medium smiled, then turned to the group and gave instructions to prepare the ritual items. Thus, I found myself participating in a ritual to call upon the soul of someone who had drowned in the river. Here's what we needed to prepare. 1. 2 altars. One altar for the river spirit and the underworld, used to summon soul guides and caretakers, placed within a small shrine. The other altar was for V, containing an image or a plaque with his name, and a dish with 2 coins for divination. Other offerings included fruit, rice, chicken, clothing, and paper money to burn for the spirits. Number 2, a reflection mirror. This mirror was used for consecration and was placed on a small plank within the shrine. 3, a sacred staff. A staff made of wood that symbolized the power to connect the living and the dead, representing the authority of Earth Treasury King Bodhisattva. 4, a spirit banner, made of paper and divided into 3 sections. The middle section contained V's name, the right section had his date of birth, and the left had his date of death. It also bore the symbols for 3 guardian spirits responsible for ensuring V's safe passage. Below the god Bin Ku, there's the incantation, Tam Hon Ko Chi, all 3 souls are gathered. Below the god Bin Chut, there's the incantation, Thut Fach Ko Lai, the 7 spirits are summoned. For men, for women, it's Ku Fach Ko Lai. The 9 spirits are summoned. The spiritual banner is tied to a bamboo rod. When V's spirit is redeemed and brought over the bridge, it will enter the spiritual banner under the protection of the Bodhisattva, represented by the sacred staff. 5. A paper doll, a paper effigy used as a substitute for V, who died unjustly at a young age. The effigy's chest is marked with V's name. After the ceremony concludes, the paper doll is thrown into the river. 6. A spirit bridge, a fabric bridge that extends from the river but doesn't touch the water, reaching the platform where the mirror is placed. The bridge has 6 horizontal bamboo crossbars. 7. A ladder made of banana leaves. This leads up to the spirit bridge, with the bottom of the ladder submerged in the water, allowing the victim's spirit to climb up the bridge. 8. 7 flags, made of paper. These are planted along the bridge at the bamboo crossbar points. Each flag carries a prayer or command from Earth Treasury King Bodhisattva to the river spirit and his messengers to locate V's soul and spirits. 9. A sacred rooster. This is a live rooster kept in a cage placed beside the deity statue under the bridge. The rooster is given a sacred talisman to swallow, enabling it to locate the victim's spirit. Roosters have 5 virtuous qualities: feathered, brave, valiant, humane, and trustworthy. This sacred rooster, having consumed a talisman, is now capable of divine work. 10. A spirit cauldron. A clay pot with a heavy lid containing talismans. A heavy stone holds down the lid to prevent the power from escaping and causing harm to the victim's relatives. 11. A small boat. Anchored on the riverbank, this boat is used for the ceremony. The boat transports the talismans, paper doll, and sacred rooster to the middle of the river, where they are then thrown into the water. Once everything is set up, the medium picks an auspicious day and time. She declares that Sunday is the best day, so everyone agrees to conduct the ceremony on Sunday. I pointed out that Sunday is tomorrow, given today is Saturday. The medium then instructed me that when I join her on the boat, I should use my ability to communicate with the river spirit, ensure he accepts the offerings, and make sure the ritual concludes successfully. I nodded in agreement, acknowledging that this was an important task. The next morning, I joined the others at the site where V drowned. Everything was set up, and the medium showed me the boat where I would sit during the ritual. Despite the morning sun's intense heat, it felt oddly cool and breezy near the river. The medium and her assistant sat on a mat to the right of the altar, between the altar and the river. V's family and relatives sat on another mat, facing the altar. Mayen sat behind the medium, keeping an eye out for the river spirit. The medium instructed Mayen to alert us if he noticed any spirits gathering or if the river spirit appeared. The ritual began with the reading of incantations, asking the river spirit to bring V's soul back. The assistant then read the incantations to call V's soul, followed by a prayer to honor his spirit. While reading the incantations, the medium and her assistant performed various rites and immediately burned the written prayers. The medium then led V's spirit onto the spiritual bridge, where the heavy bridge felt the weight of his soul. People saw footprints with mud on the bridge, causing a wave of fear among the onlookers, while V's family wept bitterly. The medium continued the ritual by performing the consecration ceremony, using the mirror to help V's spirit become clear-minded once more. Once the consecration was complete, she looked at Mayen, who then indicated the river spirit had appeared at the whirlpool where V drowned. At that moment, the wind picked up and dark clouds gathered, signaling something significant was happening. I also felt a force affecting me, prompting the assistant to row the boat, circling the whirlpool while the medium chanted and the assistant beat a drum. I was tasked with communicating with the river spirit to ensure the offerings were accepted. "Oh, great river spirit, we humbly ask for your mercy to grant peace to those who have passed. Please accept our offerings," I said as I communicated with the spirit. The river spirit smiled and nodded, indicating his acceptance. I then threw the paper doll and sacred rooster into the river, followed by the spirit cauldron as instructed by the medium. The medium then led the spirit bridge to V's grave to guide his spirit back to its final resting place. Drums beat loudly as she invoked the incantations, marking the conclusion of the ceremony. Following this, my N ran to inform V's family that his soul had been guided safely back to his resting place and that he waved in gratitude, thanking everyone for their support. Hearing this, V's family broke down in tears, but they also felt reassured that his soul had found peace. With the ceremony over, V's family invited everyone to their home for lunch, as a way of showing gratitude for the assistance during these difficult times. I went along with the group, accompanied by the medium and my N. The medium then spoke to my N. "If you remove that iron stake, all of you will die. It's holding the spirit of Mrs. H, and if it comes loose, she'll return and torment everyone," they warned in unison. Hearing this, Mrs. Bayo sneered and brushed off the warnings, still bent on tearing down the house. The crowd, now more agitated, began raising their voices, warning her about the consequences of disturbing the cursed stake. "Get out of here while you still can. That iron stake is what's keeping the evil spirit of Mrs. H contained. You don't want to deal with her anger," a concerned bystander added. Despite the mounting resistance, Mrs. Bayo remained stubborn and determined to show her power. She yelled at her entourage to get back to the cars and was visibly irritated by the public's intervention. Her husband, seeing the situation escalating, attempted to reason with her. "Honey, let's just leave this alone for now. We can come back later when things have settled down. It's not worth stirring up more trouble," he said, trying to calm her down. But she was too angry to listen. "Trouble? What trouble? These peasants can't tell me what to do with my property. They don't even know who I am. And you, don't tell me what to do," she snapped at him. With a swift move, she walked toward the cars, but not without throwing a final insult at the crowd. "You can keep your cursed house. This entire place is pathetic," she shouted, slamming the car door as she got in. As the cars drove away, everyone in the crowd felt a collective sigh of relief, but there was also a lingering tension. The possibility of Mrs. H's spirit being released loomed over everyone. The crowd stayed for a while, discussing what to do next, and then gradually dispersed. As my N and I walked away from the scene, he turned to me and said, "This is far from over. With people like Mrs. Bayo around, we're not safe. We need to stay vigilant." I nodded in agreement. It was clear that this was only the beginning, and the threat of more danger still lingered. But at least for now, we had averted a catastrophe by keeping the cursed stake in place. The future, however, held more uncertainty and challenges as the presence of dark spirits loomed over the town. If any of you even think about touching that iron stake, we'll do everything we can to stop you. Sure, the land might be yours, but you better not mess with this part, the locals warned. Mrs. Bayo realized that things were getting tense and got back in the car to leave. But everyone was on edge, worried that trouble might come again. They all gathered at V's house, where a sense of unease filled the air. Later that evening, Mrs. Bayo sent a crew to tear down the old house. The townsfolk rushed to the scene, watching as the workers dismantled everything. Mrs. Bayo yelled at the crowd, taunting them. "If you're scared of that floozy who haunted this place, don't worry anymore. I've taken care of her for you. she boasted. She pointed at a man who looked important, dressed in a fancy suit. He held a bundle of incense and was conducting a ritual. The locals were suspicious of him, thinking he might be a phony spiritualist. The man lit a few sticks of incense and declared that the spirit of Mrs. H had been released and that the land was now clean. This angered the locals, who knew that removing the iron stake could bring chaos. A commotion broke out as people argued and protested against the crew. Mrs. Bayo, annoyed by the resistance, called for backup, and soon the provincial police arrived. They listened to both sides of the story, but Mrs. Bayo's money and connections swayed their decision. They ruled that the land belonged to her and that she had the right to build on it. The townsfolk felt defeated. Mrs. Bayo smirked as her crew removed the iron stake, taunting the locals. She then ordered her workers to continue dismantling the old house. As the iron stake was pulled out, the locals watched in frustration, unable to stop them. Mrs. Bayo continued to boast. "See, you were all scared for nothing. I've removed the stake and nothing happened," she shouted. Everyone stood there, feeling a mix of fear and anger. I was there, watching the whole scene. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if something was squeezing the life out of me. I collapsed, gasping for air, my face turning pale. Mayan rushed over to support me while the others gathered around. "Are you okay?" Mayan asked, his voice filled with concern. I could barely speak, struggling to breathe. The town elder yelled at Mayan. "Mayan, can you see anything? What's happening?" Mayan tried to focus, but he couldn't see anything unusual. He then pointed at me and urged me to concentrate. Despite my pain, I tried to sense what was causing this. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't see anything, just a dark cloud of negative energy. It was as if something had broken loose, releasing a powerful force. Everyone was anxious, and the elder reassured them, saying, "Maybe the trappings haven't been completely broken. The iron stake might have caused a leak, allowing the dark energy to escape. As long as the stone isn't broken, we should be safe." With those words, the crowd started to disperse. My friends helped me back to my house, but the sense of dread remained. What had we just unleashed? Would the removal of the iron stake lead to more trouble? Only time would tell. The next morning, I woke up feeling incredibly sluggish, like I'd been hit by a truck. As I lay sprawled on the bed, not wanting to get up, Mayan and his friends barged in and raided all the snacks in the house, leaving nothing for me. Mayan came over and asked if anything weird had happened to me the previous night, then mentioned that the wind had been strong, children were crying, and dogs were barking. All signs that the town was on edge. While I was still processing this, C, who was munching on my snacks, chimed in. "Mayan, tell him what we went through last night. Let's get him in the group. With more people with special abilities, we'll be safer." Mayan then started recounting everything that had happened, and I interjected, "Oh yeah, I've heard people talking about it, but I thought it had died down by now." C said, "Dude, you should get up and brush your teeth. We're going to a meeting to discuss how to deal with everything that's happening. I don't know why, but I've got this feeling of urgency." "Don't you get it, C? We're all getting into trouble because of curiosity," M added. C responded, "I don't care to argue with you, M. D, hurry up." I got up, but my whole body felt heavy, like I was drained. As we walked past Mrs. H's house, we saw that Mrs. Bayo had brought in a spiritualist to perform some sort of ritual before starting construction. We just shook our heads and moved on. Suddenly, Mayan jerked and said, "Did anyone hear that?" The rest of us said in unison, "No." "Of course not. I was just joking," he laughed. "Dude, that's not funny. We're all freaked out," M said. "Come on, let's hurry," I replied. When we got to the community center, Everyone was gathered to discuss how to deal with Mrs. Bayo and her plans to start construction. The town elder said that we needed to negotiate with her to make sure she didn't disturb the hole where the iron stake was removed. Before leaving, Mr. Kháu had warned us that the hole was crucial for containing Mrs. H's spirit. If it were damaged, there could be serious consequences. People had different ideas. Some suggested inviting Mr. Kháu back to perform a new sealing ritual. Others proposed digging up the dirt and applying Mayen's blood, but that was too risky because it might break the trappings. After much debate, they agreed to try negotiating with Mrs. Bayo. The elder, along with a few other representatives, went to talk to Mrs. Bayo, and we tagged along like little chicks. When we got there, Mrs. Bayo's expression was fierce, and she was in no mood for discussion. "What do you all want now? Trying to scare me again?" she snapped. "Excuse me, ma'am," the elder said politely. "We're here to negotiate a little matter with you." "And what matter is that?" she replied with a huff. "Well, you know the situation here. Mrs. H was a neighbor, and everything that happened was unfortunate. We kindly ask that you avoid disturbing that particular patch of land. It would be in everyone's best interest." Mrs. Bayo, who liked flattery, softened a bit. "Well, if you put it that way, sure, I don't want any more trouble. But let me tell you, I'm not afraid of that floozy's ghost. I just don't want to cause problems for you folks." Everyone was relieved and thanked her. As we were leaving, she yelled, "Hey, don't go too far. I'm not done yet." She had a sharp tongue, and we were glad to get away from her. However, she rented a nearby guest house to keep an eye on the construction site, indicating she wasn't backing down completely. It was clear that trouble might be brewing, and the town had to be on high alert. We stood there for a while when Mayen asked if I felt anything. Honestly, I didn't feel anything. It was like the negative energy from yesterday had dissipated, probably due to the sunlight. While we were chatting, M suddenly exclaimed, "Hey, it's a full moon tonight." C was puzzled. "So what if it's a full moon?" M replied, "Don't you remember what we promised the leader? We said we'd visit him on the full moon." We all remembered but realized it was already close to noon. Since it was too late to go now, Mayen suggested we go to his place for lunch and head out in the afternoon. Everyone agreed, so we headed to Mayen's house. After cooking and eating lunch, Mayen's mom said, "I don't want any of you going anywhere near Mrs. H's place. Okay? We don't need any more trouble." We all nodded and said, "Yes, ma'am." But I thought to myself, the one you should really scold is C. He's always the instigator. After lunch, we gathered some money to buy offerings and headed to the home for a quick visit. We lit some incense sticks, and the leader appeared. He seemed pleased that Mayen had kept his promise. After chatting a bit, I asked him if he knew anything about Mrs. H's situation. He mentioned he knew about the Ting on our street, but he didn't want to interfere because river water doesn't mix with well water. He said Mrs. H was quite powerful and hinted that he might not be able to match her strength. Her rage and thirst for revenge had driven her to become a Tin, and the only way to weaken her was to ease her resentment. He pointed at Mayen and said, "Be careful, a great calamity is coming. If you survive, you'll be blessed. If you don't, it's just fate." Then he disappeared. Hearing this made Mayen anxious, so C tried to comfort him. "Don't worry, everything can be resolved. Besides, you've got your special blood, right?" Even though C could be rough, he knew how to reassure a friend. After his words, Mayen felt a little better. As we were leaving the area, I thought, man, C may be blunt, but he has a good heart. Later, C called and invited me to hang out. I was all for it. Spending time with them was always fun. We gathered Mayen, M, and T, and before we knew it, it was 10 p.m. We had covered every topic imaginable, from from whether the chicken or the egg came first to random pop culture debates. When it was time to head home, we had to pass by Mrs. H's house, and the place gave us the creeps. The whole atmosphere was chilling, with dogs barking and a strange stillness in the air. The sky suddenly darkened with thick clouds, and the wind grew stronger. As we passed by the construction site, lightning flashed, and we froze in place, not sure what was going on. Em said, "Guys, there's something in that tree." We all looked, but couldn't see anything clearly. The dogs kept barking, and the wind howled. C mentioned that it reminded him of when the black cat and Mrs. H would appear, but M pointed out that the cat was dead and Mrs. H was sealed away. S urged my N to check again, and he couldn't sense anything unusual. D, try to sense it, my N suggested. I focused, but it was hard to get a clear read on what was happening. The storm grew more intense, and it felt like the whole street was on edge. It was like something was moving quickly, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Could Mrs. H have escaped? I wondered as the lightning crackled through the sky, but Mayan suddenly spoke up. "I see it now. It's not Mrs. H. There's something hiding behind that tree. We should go check it out." "You're crazy. Have you forgotten what happened last time?" M shouted. "If we don't check, how will we know what it is?" Mayan replied. So Mayan took the lead and ventured towards the tree, and I had to follow. Despite the danger, I couldn't let him go alone. The wind had stopped, and only the occasional lightning bolt lit the path. As we circled the tree, nothing seemed out of place. But when we turned to leave, we heard a loud thud. M screamed, "Guys, someone just fell from the tree." It was the first time I saw a dead body, and I panicked, screaming louder than M. Soon, a crowd gathered, including the fat lady and her husband. When they saw the body, the husband turned pale, stuttering incomprehensibly. It wasn't long before the police arrived. The body was identified as the foreman hired by the fat lady. The police said there were no signs of foul play, and the cause of death was similar to Mr. B's, likely a heart attack induced by fear. After the examination, the police took the body away. The fat lady started cursing as they left, and her husband was visibly shaken, muttering incoherent words. "Please don't come back to haunt me. I'm sorry," he said. The fat lady dragged him away, trying to save face. People began asking my N if this was Mrs. H's doing. He responded, "It wasn't Mrs. H, but whoever did this took the soul and left the body behind. Only powerful spirits like Mr. B or Mrs. H could do this, but they're both still sealed away. So who could it be?" As people discussed the possible cause of death, they decided to go home. One of the elders offered to escort me back, fearing for my safety. As we walked, I thought I heard a faint laugh carried by the wind, but the elder didn't seem to notice it. It gave me chills, but I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Still, I couldn't shake off the feeling of dread that night. The next day, as I walked home from school, I bumped into my N and the gang. I wish we went to the same school. It would have been fun. They invited me for a drink, and we ended up discussing the previous night's incident. Everyone was worried about who might have caused the foreman's death, and the methods resembled Mrs. H's. My N then pulled out 5 small pins and explained that he had filled them with his blood, offering one to each of us. "This is for protection," he said. "We're facing something dangerous, and I don't want any more of my friends to die. These pins contain my blood, and if anything feels off or if you sense danger, pull out the pin, and the blood should be enough to protect you." C reassured my N. "Don't worry, man, we'll always have your back." M agreed, saying, "Yeah, better safe than sorry. I'll take one." I grabbed a pin, knowing how potent Mayan's blood could be. We sat there for a while until my mom called, saying that my grandpa was sick and my parents had to visit him, leaving me on my own for a few days. I felt like I was getting a taste of freedom, but there was also a sense of foreboding. My En invited me to his place for dinner since my parents were away. His parents were friendly, and I felt at home. It wasn't long before I started feeling like part of their family. However, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in the air, and I knew we were far from solving the mysteries of the strange happenings in our town. Going back to my En's house required passing by Mrs. H's house. During the day, it felt normal, but at night, it was spooky. The construction workers were still at work, and the investigators were still investigating. At my En's house, his mother was cooking dinner, and I jumped in to help. Although at home, my mom had to call my name several times to get me off the couch. While I was cleaning the vegetables, Mrs. S, the neighbor, came over, and the two women started talking about Mrs. H. "Do you think H could have woken up?" Mrs. S asked. "I'm not sure," my En's mom replied, sounding worried. "I'm getting anxious. Last time, H came to harm me. If she breaks free, I might be doomed." "Why don't you call a priest to put some talismans around the house?" Mrs. S suggested. "I've thought about it, but I keep telling myself that I haven't done anything wrong to her, so why would she bear a grudge against me?" My En's mom explained. "Besides, the day everything happened, it was raining and I heard loud voices from H's house. I didn't think it was my business to intervene, you know? It wasn't my place to meddle." "That's understandable, but still, she almost got you last time. Be careful," Mrs. S advised. "I know. Honestly, I'm not worried about myself. I've lived long enough, but I am concerned about my En. I hope H hasn't escaped, otherwise I'm not sure how we'll handle it." Mrs. S nodded. "Yeah, well, I'll head back and cook dinner. Take care." As Mrs. S left, I noticed a worried look on my En's mom's face. During dinner, the atmosphere was tense. Nobody said much. Just then, a construction worker from Mrs. H's site came over to borrow some oil because they ran out while cooking. My En's mom got up to fetch it, and the worker started chatting with us. "I'm scared," he confessed. "Do you hear strange things over here at night? We keep hearing voices telling us to leave, to get out." "Really?" my En's mom asked. "Yeah," he replied. "I'm thinking of quitting after a week or two. Since the foreman died, everyone is on edge." My En's mom returned with the oil. "Here, you can take this. Don't worry about it. Just take care of yourself." After dinner, we tidied up and my En and I took a nap. I had a weird dream in which a woman appeared and asked me who I was. I answered, "I'm just a butterfly fluttering around." She replied, "Oh, you like butterflies, huh?" I woke up suddenly, sweating. I was more scared of what I said in my dream than the dream itself. I turned to see if my En was awake, but he was mumbling in his sleep. I tried to wake him, but he wouldn't respond. It reminded me of those times when you can't wake up, like in sleep paralysis. I knew I needed help to wake him up. I rushed out to find my En's parents, but the house was empty. They had gone out. My head started spinning, and I felt an overwhelming weight on my shoulders. My limbs were heavy, and it felt like I was losing control. I could still think clearly, but my body wasn't responding to my thoughts. I glanced at a fruit knife on the table and found myself reaching for it, even though I didn't want to. I was being controlled by something, and my efforts to resist were in vain. I moved toward my En's room with the knife in my hand, unable to call out or scream for help. My mind was screaming for me to stop, but my body wasn't listening. I was about to send my En to the other side, and the thought made tears stream down my face. I raised the knife high, ready to strike. A piercing scream echoed through the room, and in rushed C lunged at me, grabbing me in a tight bear hug. "Are you crazy, D? What are you doing?" In my mind, I was trying to speak, but I couldn't. "It's not me," I wanted to say. I was unnaturally strong. With a single shove, I sent C flying against the wall, where he crashed with a loud thud. I turned my attention back to Mayen. He was still out cold despite all the commotion. "Wake up! Mayen, wake up!" I heard M shouting. C got back on his feet and lunged at me again, shouting, "Get the needle! It's not D anymore! What do I do with it? Where do I stick it? Shove it up his!" "Are you insane? He's not a ghost!" M shouted. I threw C off me again. I lunged toward M, as if I'd shifted targets. C, realizing the danger, pulled out his needle and ran toward me. He stabbed the needle into my right bicep, driving it in deep. I let out a scream of pain before I collapsed into unconsciousness. "Who are you?" I heard someone ask in the darkness. This time, I wasn't a butterfly fluttering around. "A Power Ranger," I replied. "Oh, a superhero, huh?" When I heard the sentence, I felt an overwhelming fear and woke up screaming, surrounded by everyone. Mayan's parents, some neighbors, and my friends. They all breathed a sigh of relief when they saw me awake. I had no idea what was happening until they explained that when C stabbed me with the needle, I fainted and they rushed me to the hospital. At the hospital, they gave me a tetanus shot and treated the wound. They decided not to call my parents to avoid worrying them. When I focused on the pain in my arm, I noticed a sharp ache where the needle went in. Thankfully, the needle was only about a centimeter long and had a stopper that prevented it from going in too deep. I was grateful that M hadn't stabbed me in the heart. It felt like I had just escaped death's grip. They asked me what had happened, and I explained that while I was aware of everything around me, I couldn't control my actions, as if something else had taken over my body. I told them about the recurring dream where a shadowy figure kept asking who I was and my bizarre answers. Mrs. S, a neighbor, mentioned that I was lucky I didn't give my real name. According to her, in a dream state, giving your name could mean being dragged to the other side. That made me shiver. I then asked about my N, who was still unconscious, and they said they were trying to wake him up. I had a feeling something was wrong, and I asked everyone to be quiet. I sensed something approaching, and it turned out to be the leader of the spirits. He gave me some advice before vanishing. I told Mayan's parents that they needed holy water mixed with ginger and a bit of alcohol. They should use incense to fan the mixture over Mayan and then gently poke his earlobes with a needle to wake him up. When everyone left, I pretended to collapse, then suddenly pulled out my needle and raised it. C, seeing me do this, shouted in panic. I couldn't help but laugh. He cursed at me, and I jokingly told him that if he experienced a needle in his bicep, he wouldn't be laughing. He rubbed my arm and the tension eased. By then, it was almost dusk, and I worried if Mayan had woken up yet. Soon after, Mayan's father came to pick us up and take us to Mayan's house. On the way, I asked if Mayan had woken up, and he said he had, and that dinner was ready. When we arrived, I was so relieved to see a full table of food. I hadn't felt that hungry in a long time. As we sat down, Mayan's mother mentioned to me that she had spoken to my mother, and they were busy with a family emergency. I explained that my grandfather was ill, and they were taking care of him. She said they didn't want me to go back home alone, and that I was welcome to stay with them for a few days. I pretended to be hesitant, but I was thrilled about the offer. D, we don't have any fancy food here, Mayan teased. Fancy? I can eat pig slop, I replied, making everyone laugh. After dinner, we decided to get some fresh air. We saw Mr. H walking as if he was in a trance, almost floating down the street. Intrigued, we followed him. He stopped in front of Mrs. H's house and seemed to climb onto a scaffold, as if contemplating jumping. Suddenly, he started laughing hysterically, pointing at Mrs. H. "You heartless villain! You monster! What are you talking about? It's me! It's me!" As the commotion grew, people rushed out to see what was happening. Mr. H was on his knees, pleading with someone. My end tried to sense something but couldn't detect anything. Everyone looked to me for help, so I concentrated and said, "I see a woman standing up there, talking to him. She seems angry and is mentioning something about losing a child, but I can't hear clearly." When I finished, the crowd buzzed with whispers, suspecting it was Miss H breaking free. The town elder raised his voice asking, "Miss H, is that you?" "Shut up, you have no right to call my name," Mr. H yelled as if he was possessed. It was like he was being controlled, just like I was. He pointed at Mrs. Bayo, shouting, "I'll send you to the deepest pits of hell. You'll suffer as I did, and I'll devour your soul." Ha ha ha! Mrs. Bayo, once aggressive and sharp-tongued, was now pale with fear. H then turned to Mayen, saying, "Remember me? The one-eyed kid?" Mayen didn't respond, remaining silent. Mr. H then pointed at me. "Who are you? How can you see me? You've been sending waves trying to breach my mind, haven't you? If I hadn't resisted, you'd already be inside my thoughts." I stood silent, unsure how to respond. The townspeople pulled me behind them for protection. Mr. H started speaking again, but then he screamed wildly and vanished into thin air. The husband, looking like he was completely out of it, jumped off the scaffolding and died instantly. Everyone was terrified. Some called the police. Others called for an ambulance. As for Mrs. Bayo, she just sat there, stunned, unable to move, staring at her husband's lifeless body. When the police arrived, they shook their heads with a look of exasperation. The officers murmured among themselves, "This play is starting up again. If you blame it on demons, no one will believe you. It's always accidental death or caught a chill in the reports." Sigh. It seemed like the authorities were just going through the motions, not really wanting to delve too deeply into the matter. They took statements, and Mrs. Bayo said that since the death of the lead worker, her husband's mental state had become unstable. He spent his days mumbling to himself, and she planned to take him to see a doctor the next morning. But then this tragic event happened. The autopsy concluded that it was a suicide, as they couldn't officially record it as a death caused by supernatural forces. The explanation to higher-ups was challenging, and even among the locals, rumors spread that it was the work of a demon. Many were convinced that Mrs. H had broken free, prompting the police to work with the locals to dig up the site. Indeed, the stone used to trap Mrs. H was shattered. If it was supposed to sap her strength, how could she now control a living person? This raised many questions. After the investigation, the police left, leaving behind a distraught and seemingly dazed Mrs. Bayo. The villagers were gripped with fear and uncertainty, especially Mayan's family. Thus, they decided to seek out the help of Mr. Kháu immediately, without delay. Mayan's parents, along with a few others, arranged for a 7-seater vehicle to find Mr. Kháu. They advised us to be extra careful and take care of ourselves. However, they soon changed their minds, realizing that leaving us alone could be dangerous. It was best to take us along, even if it meant cramming everyone into the car. We left home under the watchful eyes of neighbors. As we drove along the dark, winding roads, it was eerily quiet. The sense of unease was palpable, especially after witnessing such tragic events. To break the tension, we chatted, trying to distract ourselves from the looming fear. But Mayen seemed unusually quiet and withdrawn, not his usual lively self. Midway through the journey, at a place known as Kháu Pass, the night grew darker, and the winding roads became increasingly treacherous. The eerie atmosphere heightened our anxiety, and the silence was only broken by our nervous chatter, As we reached a particularly narrow stretch, the driver spotted a person in the distance, waving at us. He asked if we should stop and give the person a ride, but my N shouted, "Don't stop! Just drive past and don't look at them." The driver was startled, but complied, driving straight through without stopping. As we passed, the figure waved vigorously, but when we looked back, the person had vanished. It was clear this was no ordinary person. It had to be a spirit. We breathed a sigh of relief, grateful that Mayan was there to steer us clear of potential dangers. We had driven about 30 kilometers, passing through desolate areas with no signs of civilization. There was still a mountain pass to cross, with a steep drop on one side and a sheer rock face on the other. As we neared the summit, we saw an overturned car blocking the road. The driver muttered, "Why is today filled with obstacles? This will be tricky to navigate around." The closer we got, Mayan insisted, "Driver, just go straight through that car and don't swerve." However, whether the warning came too late or the driver didn't fully believe it, he tried to swerve around the parked car. In doing so, our vehicle crashed into the rocky wall, crumpling the left side of the hood. The driver suffered a head injury, while those in the back sustained only minor scrapes and bruises. We were lucky because, given the steep slope, driving slowly might have saved our lives. If we'd gone off the road, we could have all died. Everyone got out of the car, hoping to find the owners of the stalled vehicle for help, but the car was nowhere to be found, just a thick mist. As we stood there dazed, Mayan explained that this was an illusion, possibly created by someone or something with supernatural powers. Going straight through the stalled vehicle would have kept us safe, but swerving had nearly killed us. Thankfully, the driver swerved toward the rocky wall instead of off the cliff. Just as we were figuring out our next move, a chilling wind swept through, sending shivers down our spines. The eerie sensation grew as Mrs. H emerged from the shadows, her haunting laughter echoing in the cold air. She appeared and disappeared, causing everyone to hold their breath in suspense. My N asked for my pin with a sharp point, which I handed to him. He pricked his finger to draw blood, then returned the pin to me. "Use this if things get dangerous," he instructed. Mrs. H moved unpredictably, but eventually she settled on the roof of the abandoned vehicle, glaring down at us. It was hard to keep track of her, as she seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. She taunted us from above, mocking our fear and threatening revenge for what we had done to her. Everyone remained silent, unsure of what to do. Mrs. H then turned to me, asking, "Who are you? What are you doing?" I tried to remain calm, ignoring her questions. Her presence was suffocating, and I could feel her anger building. Mayan's father spoke up, "Why don't you come out and face us? Why hide in the shadows?" Mrs. H laughed, her voice filled with malice. "Do you think I'm foolish enough to reveal myself to mere mortals? Only when I'm weak do I become visible. Right now, I'm stronger than ever, and you can't stop me." She pointed at me again, repeating her question, "Who are you? The bouncy butterfly or the red superhero?" It became clear that she was the one who had possessed me, attempting to control my actions. Everyone felt the weight of her presence, realizing the danger we were in. Mrs. H seemed determined to eliminate anyone who stood in her way. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice dripping with venom. I remained silent, not wanting to reveal any information. Mrs. H's anger intensified as she moved closer to me, her eyes filled with rage. The pressure was overwhelming, and I felt my body weakening under her power. Seeing this, Mayan urged everyone to hold my hand, explaining that by doing so, they could see what I was experiencing. As soon as they touched me, the ghostly figure of Mrs. H became visible to everyone. She was a horrifying sight, with wild hair, long nails, and a ghastly appearance. Her transformation over the past year was dramatic. She looked more like a vengeful spirit than the woman we once knew. As everyone saw her, she grew furious, realizing her cover was blown. She began to move erratically, her rapid movements causing disruption in my ability to focus. I could feel my strength fading, and blood trickled from my nose. When they let go, everything became disorienting. Before I knew it, Mrs. H had me by the neck, her grip tightening. I couldn't breathe, and my vision began to blur. Mayen quickly grabbed his pin and jabbed it into Mrs. H's arm. "Leave my friend alone." The sudden jab startled Mrs. H, forcing her to vanish. A moment longer, and she would have squeezed the life out of me. As she disappeared, the others quickly called for an ambulance and rescue services to transport the driver to the hospital. We all agreed to wait until morning to continue our journey. The next day, we managed to catch a bus to Mr. Kháu's house. It took until midday to find him, but once there, we felt a sense of relief, as if we'd found a guardian angel. His garden was filled with strange plants, and his home was decorated with 9 incense bowls and statues of various deities, including the Great White Planet and Sun Wukong. When we explained our situation, he seemed to understand, but suggested we stay the night to rest before heading back. At dawn, we set out for the return journey, arriving home by late afternoon. Without delay, Mr. Kháu and Mayen went to inspect the barrier and assess the damage. I tagged along, eager to see what might be wrong. As night fell, a shout from Mrs. Mayen's house drew our attention. What was happening? We rushed over to find her backing away from something, fear etched across her face. It was the neighbor's dog, but something was different. Its eyes blazed with rage, its teeth bared in a savage snarl, and drool dripped from its jaws. It didn't look like a normal dog, it looked like a beast possessed. Mrs. Mayen was paralyzed, unable to call for help, only managing to stutter, "Mayen! Mayen, help me!" before screaming, "Mayen! Mayen, save me!" Mayen dashed toward his mother, with me following closely. As he approached, the dog reared up on its hind legs, preparing to pounce. It seemed intent on attacking Mrs. Mayen, its eyes fixed on her neck. In the dim light, the dog's malevolence was palpable. Mrs. Mayen panicked and tried to run, not realizing she was cornered near the curb, with a busy street just 2 meters away. As she turned to flee, a truck barreled down the road. Everyone heard the loud crash and rushed outside. Those who saw the figure lying in the road feared it was Mayen's mother, but it wasn't. When Mayen saw his mother trying to flee, he ran to stop her but was too late. He only managed to grab her hand and pull her back, taking her place on the street where he was hit by the truck. Everyone who witnessed the scene was devastated. His mother ran to him, but blood was gushing from Mayen's mouth, nose, and arms. It didn't seem like he would make it. The dog that caused the commotion was beaten to death by the townspeople, while Mrs. H appeared, laughing shrilly. "Now you know what it's like to lose a child. Without that one-eyed brat's blood, let's see who in this town can stop me." With that, she vanished, leaving behind the haunting echoes of her maniacal laughter. The sight of Mayen's mother collapsing in grief was heart-wrenching. She fainted, overwhelmed by sorrow, while C and the rest of the group ran to see Mayen for the last time. Mayen seemed to have regained consciousness and saw me standing over him. He handed me the needle and, with his final breath, said, "Help me. Protect my family." Those were his last words before he slipped away. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. Even now, I feel a lump in my throat when I think of him. He could have been my best partner. Everyone was crying and mourning his loss. Mayen's father held his son tightly, sobbing in despair. Mr. Kháu rushed out to the scene, his face solemn. If he achieves enlightenment, he will be reborn as a human and return to you, he said, then carved a cross on the back of Mayan's hand. If you have another child with this mark, it will be Mayan returning to you. The townspeople gathered without saying a word, each contributing to the funeral preparations. It seemed like Mayan's mother couldn't bear the loss of her son. She kept asking to find him, unable to accept his passing. The townspeople called for a nurse to administer sedatives to calm her. Mr. Kháu, visibly saddened by Mayan's death, decided to stay and help the family. He checked his calculations and then turned to Mayan's father. Mayan didn't reach his allotted lifespan, yet he died tragically and unjustly, trapped in limbo. Now, if the family wants to prevent Mayan from being tormented, they must perform a ritual to sever his karmic obstacles, open the path to release him from captivity, and clear his grievances. Only then can Mayan be liberated, free to move between the realms of the living and the dead, and possibly achieve enlightenment. This is the final help I can offer to him. Mayan's father was too distraught to make any decisions, so he left everything to Mr. Kháu. After 3 days, Mr. Kháu performed the ritual to sever the karmic ties and release Mayan's spirit. Once the ritual was completed, Mayan's spirit returned, saying he had no regrets and that dying in place of his mother was his way of filial piety. He told everyone to live good lives and that the day they defeat Miss H would be the day he could reincarnate into a new life. He also advised his parents not to hold on to resentment, as it was his fate and burden to bear. After saying this, he vanished. Mr. Kháu vowed to capture the rogue spirit of Miss H and prevent her from causing further havoc. He instructed everyone to prepare for another sealing ritual. He asked someone from the family to retrieve the severed head submerged in a jar. When asked why he still had it, he explained that because Miss H had not been fully eradicated, the artifact still held value. He planned to conduct the sealing ritual on the 15th day of the lunar month, when the moon was at its brightest. Mr. Kháu followed the same process as before. As he removed the golden cloth, Miss H appeared, her eyes falling upon her child's remains, causing her rage to resurge. Her voice filled the air. "Why? You claim to be righteous, yet you refuse to release my child." Since only some could see her, her voice alone conveyed her presence. I stepped forward to confront her. "Look at what you've done. You've harmed so many people. You took my friend's life. Now it's time for you to pay the price." Miss H laughed hysterically, her voice echoing with malevolence. She glided toward her child's remains as Mr. Kháu began chanting, activating the sealing ritual. The red string once again entangled Miss H, and the stone began drawing her negative energy. However, it seemed she had found a way to counteract the binding. "Did you really think the same trick would work twice?" she taunted. She closed her eyes, murmuring words under her breath. Suddenly, the rotund figure of Mrs. Fatso emerged, seemingly under Miss H's control, demonstrating the power of spirit manipulation. A practice I'd call uminthut. As Mrs. Fatso moved with surprising agility, it became clear she was under Miss H's spell. The crowd tried to block her path, but her robust frame effortlessly broke through the barriers. Racing directly toward the sealing ritual, she used all her strength to leap into the heart of the ritual. The glass shattered, breaking the binding spell. Mr. Kháu, who was leading the ritual, was caught off guard by the sudden disruption and was thrown to one side by the backlash. Miss H managed to escape. Seeing this, Mr. Kháu mustered all his strength to deploy the 8-pillar prism, a new device he had created. It consisted of 8 wooden pillars with attached charms designed to keep Miss H trapped in place. However, this setup was weak and would only hold Miss H for a day or two at most. She would certainly find a way to regain her dark energy and break free. As for Miss Bayo, she fell into the pit, getting a shard of glass lodged in her throat, dying instantly. The townspeople handed her body over to the police before returning to discuss further strategies. This had been Mr. Kháu's most powerful binding spell, yet it had failed to permanently eliminate the demon. The only option left was to invite Buddhist monks for assistance. Everyone agreed, and they set out to gather 12 monks to help. The monks returned to rest and eat after the journey. By dusk, it seemed that Miss H was about to break free from the 8-pillar prism. The monks quickly set up a ritual. 8 monks positioned themselves around Miss H, representing the 8 points of the Bagua symbol, with 2 main monks conducting the ritual and 2 others assisting. They began to chant sutras, guiding Miss H to let go of her earthly grudges and descend to the underworld to atone for her sins. At first, Miss H screamed in agony, as if she were subjected to the pressure of a magical binding. The others and I stood outside watching as she writhed in torment. About 2 hours into the chanting, she seemed to have understood, her spirit accepting the Buddhist teachings. Tears began to flow down her cheeks. Mr. Kháu explained that initially she was still driven by rage, but as the chanting continued, her anger turned into sorrow as she lamented her fate. When she finally smiled, it signaled that she had moved beyond her resentment and could now transcend her demonic form. Hearing this, I couldn't resist the urge to get closer to where Miss H was. An hour later, it seemed as though she was about to transcend her demonic form. I leaped toward the 8-pillar prism with the needle that Mayan had given me, and I drove it deep into her chest, aiming for her heart. I shouted out loud, "You don't deserve to be redeemed. You should go to the underworld and atone for the souls you've unjustly harmed. And you need to apologize to Mayan." Tears streamed down my cheeks. No one expected me to do that. Miss H was in agony, trying to pull the needle out, but couldn't before vanishing into thin air. Everything happened so fast. Everyone watching was filled with fear. The monks looked at me and simply said one thing: "It seems it was meant to be." Since I had been thrown a fair distance, it took a moment before I could get back up. When I awoke the next day, my parents were at my bedside. They knew everything. Mr. Kháu had performed a rite to send Miss H's son to the afterlife and left that night. I couldn't help but think of Mayan, and tears welled up again. At least I had fulfilled his wish by protecting his family. I was taken in as an adopted child by Mayan's parents, as they saw that I was about his age and had a similar spirit. A year passed, but due to the deep grief, Mayan's family moved away, not wanting to be reminded of the painful memories. We lost touch after that. Years later, I heard from some neighbors who were close to Mayan's mother that she had given birth to a baby boy. I was glad to hear that. It seemed that Mayan had been reborn. Today is another full moon, bright and peaceful.